Chapter 2648. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Repairing shifting star. Time passed slowly. Unknowingly, a month had passed in the blink of an eye. During this month, the entire myriad cataclysm was peaceful. Apart from the occasional appearance of the demon prison guards in charge of patrolling, no one else had graced this place with their presence. The leader of this space fortress, Nabashan, seemed to have long forgotten about Yixian. After throwing him into the myriad cataclysm, he didn't intend to pay any attention to him. In fact, this was normal. The entire myriad cataclysm at the bottom of the space fortress imprisoned nearly 10,000 powerhouses from various races of the Federation. All of them had astonishing talents or were unique in a certain field. Yixian was just a small human at the core realm. He was indeed too insignificant to attract the attention of Nabashan. However, it was also because of this that Yixian was able to enter a small closed-door cultivation without any interference. After an entire month, he had finally completely absorbed the large amount of spiritual energy released by the Devouring system. At this moment, when Yixian suddenly opened his eyes, there was an extremely bright light flashing in the depths of his eyes. The powerful spiritual energy made him seem like he had been reborn. His temperament and aura were completely different. During this month, Yixian's harvest could be said to be huge. Not only had his consciousness been tempered to become more solid and stable, but even his knowledge sea had expanded a lot. However, this was not the main point. The most important thing was that Yixian had successfully condensed a spiritual source core in his knowledge sea that belonged solely to him. Unlike the demon cores in the brains of other demons, the spiritual source core that Yixian had condensed was smaller. It was only the size of a soybean. Moreover, its color was not dark black. Instead, it was black with hints of purple. It gave off a more compact and complex feeling of mystery. This difference was actually reasonable. After all, the spiritual source core in Yixian's knowledge sea was formed by condensing the brain crystals of more than 100 demon powerhouses. When the quantitative changes accumulated to a certain extent, it would naturally lead to a qualitative change. Stinking brat, you have a big heart. At a time like this, you've just entered a dangerous place. Yet you can still immediately calm down and cultivate. This old man was anxious for more than a month before gradually accepting his fate. Before Yixian could speak, the green-bearded old man in the cage nearest to him took the initiative to ridicule him. However, as he spoke, he seemed to recall the situation in front of him and couldn't help but sigh. Ah, it's a pity. How? It's a pity. As? Of? How? Calm. Yixian's eyes flashed. He took advantage of this opportunity to formally propose the matter of repairing the shifting star formation. As he spoke, he secretly activated the purple-black spiritual source core that had just condensed in his knowledge sea. He extended a wisp of spiritual power out of the cage like a divine sense. As long as the teleportation formation can be repaired, we might still have a chance of survival. Before he finished speaking, Yixian's face had already bloomed with a relieved smile. Sure enough, the strange black fog that pervaded the vast space of the myriad hell outside the cage had no effect on the demon's spiritual power at all. In fact, Yixian even faintly felt that the wisp of spiritual power that he extended out seemed to be slightly more solid. This gave him an illusion that this strange black fog had some kind of unique nourishing effect on the demon's spiritual power. It was the same principle as human powerhouses absorbing spiritual energy from the outside world through breathing exercises. Brat, stop dreaming. Even if you can walk out of the cage, it's meaningless. Cultivators can't use their divine sense, which is equivalent to ordinary people crippling their limbs. In such a situation, you won't be able to walk out of the myriad hell. The green-bearded old man was extremely disapproving of Yixian's words. He unceremoniously poured cold water on him once again. What if I don't fear this strange black fog outside the cage? The corners of Yixian's mouth slowly curled into a playful smile. As he spoke, he directly extended his spiritual power and directly entered the cage 100 meters away. It circled around the green-bearded old man's body once before retracting. The entire process was extremely fast, without the slightest delay. Although it was not affected by the strange black fog outside the cage at all, it was as if it was ignored. "Oh my God, Brat, how did you do it?" The green-bearded old man's eyes widened and he gasped. Then, as if he suddenly realized something, his expression suddenly changed. "No, the power you extended just now was clearly not the divine sense of a human cultivator, but the spiritual power of a demon powerhouse. Could it be that you—" "Don't tell me you suspect that I'm a demon?" Yi Xian shook his head and smiled bitterly. "I just hunted some demons, collected some of their brain cores, and absorbed their spiritual power for my own use. If not, I wouldn't be locked up here now." "You actually have the spiritual power of a demon? Doesn't that mean, as long as you find the opportunity, you can completely disguise yourself as a demon and infiltrate the enemy's camp?" The green-bearded old man's eyes grew brighter and brighter. Even his body was slightly trembling with excitement. Then, he changed the topic and actually took the initiative to urge Yi Xian. "Then what are you waiting for? Brat, hurry up and use your spiritual power to send that warship over here. This old man will quickly repair the teleportation formation so that you can get out of this cage as soon as possible. Hee, since you are not afraid of the strange black fog outside the cage, and can even disguise yourself as a demon and infiltrate the enemy's camp, this is a very good thing." At a time like this, Yi Xian naturally wouldn't be polite. He faintly smiled, and with a flip of his hand, he took out the space box that contained the small battleship from the undying world within his body. He wrapped it with his mental energy and directly sent it out of the cage, handing it over to the green-bearded old man 100 meters away. "This old man will definitely return you a warship with a complete formation in 3 days and 10 days if you are slow. Brat, just you wait." Raising his hand to receive the space box, the green-bearded old man's face was flushed with excitement. He confidently patted his chest to prove to Yi Xian, then turned around and returned to the corner of the cage to sit cross-legged. 3 days later, the space box returned to Yi Xian's hands. Before he could check the condition of the warship, the green-bearded old man had already spoken. "The teleportation formation engraved on this warship is not bad. The proportion of damaged parts is not very large. Now that it has been repaired, you can use it without worry. However," the green-bearded old man suddenly changed the topic and sighed softly. "However, this teleportation formation originally had 2 shortcomings. Although it does not affect the teleportation, it can't teleport your entire warship away at the same time. It will be quite troublesome to use it in the future." Chapter 2649. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Escape? Insufficient materials? Yi Xian furrowed his eyebrows and glanced meaningfully at the cage 100 meters away, but he did not expose the old man. The green-bearded elder was clearly worried that Yi Xian would abandon him after he escaped, which was why he did this on purpose. It was a little petty, but it was understandable. Yi Xian immediately extended his mental energy once again, wrapping it around the small spatial box that contained the starshift and returning it to his palm. After pondering for a while, he gave up on the idea of handing the starshift to the system and merging it with the purple invisible shuttle. Since the teleportation formation engraved on the warship's body was flawed, it could teleport Yi Xian out, but the warship itself could only be trapped in the cage. In that case, he had to be more careful. After all, Yi Xian could barely accept the loss of the starshift, but if the purple invisible shuttle was lost as well, he would really be depressed. Yi Xian extended his hand and opened the small spatial box. A small silver battleship entered his eyes. Yi Xian sent his divine sense into the small box and directly took out the repaired starshift. However, he immediately put it into his body. The space inside the cage was only about 100 square meters, and while the starshift was only a small warship, it could not fit inside it. What Yi Xian needed to do now was to refine the starshift so that it could be as big or as small as he wanted. The entire process was very fast. In just a few minutes, the starshift was successfully refined by Yi Xian. Then, with a wave of his hand, the starshift battleship appeared on the ground of the cage, and its body shrunk to a length of several tens of meters. Yi Xian didn't delay any longer, and directly activated the teleportation formation engraved on the hull of the starshift battleship. Buzz! A faint buzzing sound was heard as the densely packed teleportation formation runes engraved on the starshift's body lit up and emitted a faint white light. It immediately attracted the attention of the prisoners in the nearby cages. There were nearly 10,000 cages in the myriad hells, and more than 80% of them were prisoners. It was impossible that all of them did not have a teleportation formation treasure. Before Yi Xian came here, many people had probably tried to do so, but the final result should be the same as what the green-bearded elder said. While the teleportation formation could allow him to escape the cage, he could not leave the myriad hells. Once he was discovered by the patrolling translation formation devils, he would probably suffer some physical pain. Because of this, almost all of the gazes directed at Yi Xian were full of mockery, and it was obvious that they did not think Yi Xian's chances. Some of them even cackled in schadenfreude. This scene annoyed Yi Xian quite a bit. He glanced at the cages coldly, paying special attention to the cages that were cackling, and secretly memorizing their locations. Didn't the green-bearded elder say that he lacked the materials to completely repair the star shift? Sure, no problem. If you lack the materials, I'll help you gather them. With so many Federation powerhouses imprisoned in the myriad hells, Yi Xian did not believe that they could not even gather the materials to repair the starshift's teleportation formation. If it was before, Yi Xian might have been too embarrassed to make a move, but now, you asked for it. With this thought in mind, the corners of Yi Xian's mouth immediately curled into a mysterious smile that caused others to ponder. Then, he stepped into the white light that lit up the hull of the starshift. Swish! The light of teleportation flashed, and the cages were instantly restored to their original state. However, Yi Xian was nowhere to be seen. Only the starshift was docked on the ground of the cages. Almost at the same time, in an area several hundred meters away from Yi Xian's cage, the space that was filled with mysterious black fog suddenly rippled like a ripple on the surface of water. Then Yi Xian stepped out of the ripple, with a hint of excitement on his face. In any case, at least he had walked out of the cages and made a good start. He was not far away from escaping this defense in space. Yi Xian turned his head and looked around. He quickly discovered that the location he'd teleported to wasn't too far away from his cage, and the green-bearded old man's cage was even closer. It was just over 200 meters away. He immediately walked over and stopped in front of the elder's cage. He cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for repairing the star shift, elder. If this Yi has a way to get out of this myriad hells, I will definitely not abandon you. It's rare for you to be so considerate. This old man really didn't misjudge you." The green-bearded elder nodded with a smile. He then looked around and said in a serious tone, "But although you don't fear the mysterious black fog outside the cage, the demon wardens patrolling this myriad hells are not simple. Always be cautious. If you don't have absolute confidence, it's best not to make a move. Remember, you only have one chance. Watch carefully before you make a move." Yi Xian nodded and did not say anything else. He turned around and fled to an area where the cages were relatively sparse. He immediately found a corner and hid there. The demon wardens patrolling this myriad hells were actually ordinary demons. Their cultivation was not high. After all the captives were imprisoned in the cages. Even if there were a few who could leave the cages through the teleportation formation, they could not leave this myriad hells. They did not dare to cause trouble. Otherwise, they would only end up dead. Because of this, the entire myriad hells was extremely safe for the demon wardens on patrol. There was no need for them to send experts to guard this place. There were a total of 100 demonkin wardens patrolling the myriad cataclysm. Their cultivation bases were all around the 5th level of the core realm. There was only one warden commander who was a few levels higher, at the 8th level of the core realm. Compared to Yeshuan, he was only a small level stronger. Yi Xian had always relied on killing to pave the way. Fighting above his level was already a common occurrence for him. As long as he found the opportunity, killing this demon warden commander would be a piece of cake. However, as a commander, it was impossible for him to walk around the myriad hells alone. Even if he occasionally came out to investigate, there would be many wardens following behind him. The only way to kill this person was to first kill one of the demon wardens and disguise himself as the warden. Then, he would wait for an opportunity to provoke and kill the warden. Only in this way would the other devil prison guards not interfere too much when Yi Xian made his move. After all, in the devil world, it was natural for the strong to prey on the weak. It was not uncommon for subordinates to challenge their superiors. Chapter 2650. Hundreds respond to a Kalin Wan Luo prison. The patrol duty of the demon prison guards was very relaxed. They only needed to come out and wander around every day. Even the number of patrol members was not particularly strict. Although a patrol team had 5 people, if anyone wanted to slack off or something like that, they didn't even need to inform them. And now the patrol team of demon prison guards that was walking towards Yixian's hiding place was even smaller. There were only 3 demon prison guards. With Yixian's 7th level core realm cultivation, he was completely confident that he could kill them all if they were caught off guard. The sound of footsteps gradually became clearer. The 3 demon prison guards were finally approaching. At this moment they were only 20 meters away from Yixian. Shoo! Along with the faint sound of breaking through the air, when the demon patrol team passed by, a black light suddenly rushed out from the left without any warning. It was extremely fast, and after a quick circle, the heads of the 3 demon prison guards fell to the ground silently. This black waterfall was formed from Yixian's astral essence sword. At this moment, after killing the 3 devil cultivator jailers with a thunderous roar, Yixian immediately raised his hand and withdrew it back into his body. Then, he quickly rushed out and cut open the 3 heads of the demons that had rolled on the ground. He took out the brain cores and took off the black robe of the prison guard that one of them was wearing. He then searched the 3 corpses and made sure that there was no such thing as an identity token. He then raised his hand and shot out a firework. Soon the corpses on the ground were burned to ashes. After doing all this, Yixian put on the prison guard's robe that he peeled off, lowered his head a few times, and then swaggered to the other areas of Wanluo prison. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Yixian bumped into a patrolling group of devil cultivator jailers. There were only 4 of them, and after a moment of hesitation, he nervously walked up to them and enthusiastically took the initiative to raise his hand and make a sound. Sure enough, when the 4 demon prison guards saw Yixian, they didn't have any abnormal reaction at all. They even grinned and exchanged pleasantries with him. The reason for this strange situation was actually because Yixian had fully activated the spiritual source core in his brain, so his body was constantly emitting the unique spiritual aura of a demon. In fact, from the moment Yixian condensed that small spirit core in his sea of consciousness, his aura was completely different from that of the other devil cultivators. Even a devil cultivator with a high cultivation base would not be able to see anything wrong with it. After a few words, Yixian and the 4 demon prison guards were already extremely familiar with each other, so they decided to join their group. As they chatted, they strolled around the myriad heaven prison. Following Yixian's deliberate persuasion, the 4 demon prison guards immediately had a good impression of him. The 5 of them walked in the 10,000 nets prison, chatting and laughing as if they were best friends who had known each other for many years. During this process, Yixian used indirect methods to get a basic understanding of the situation of the prison guards in Wanluo prison. There was an unwritten rule in the Myriad Cataclysm. All patrolling wardens, as long as they had the ability to obtain resources from the captives in the cages, would only have to hand over 70% of the items they obtained. The remaining 30% would belong to them. The 4 demon prison guards that Yixian met at this moment had already discussed that they were going to attack one of the prisoners in one of the cages. Yixian happened to be there at the right time. In addition, the 4 prison guards felt that Yixian was quite congenial with him, so they warmly invited him to go with them. They even expressed that they would share the final harvest with Yixian equally. Everyone would be good brothers in the future. This time Yixian had coincidentally picked up a ready-made bargain, so he treated it as a form of bonding. What made him completely speechless was that the 4 of them were leading him in the direction of the cages where he and the green-bearded old man were imprisoned. Yixian was a little nervous. Could it be that the target of these 4 fellows was coincidentally him? A quarter of an hour later, when the 4 prison guards who were leading the way were standing outside the cages where the green-bearded old man was imprisoned, Yixian did not know how to describe his current feelings. His face was full of embarrassment. In fact, the green-bearded old man in the cage was even more dumbfounded than Yixian. Calculating the time, it had only been 4 to 6 hours since Yixian left this place. Who would have thought that when he appeared again it was to torture him? Brother Yi, this green-bearded old geezer is not simple. Don't be fooled by his pitiful appearance. He has a lot of good things in his hands. This old geezer is the famous array master Lu Wenxuan of the human race. It wasn't easy for us to capture him. Just as Yixian and the green-bearded old man in the cage were staring at each other awkwardly, one of the 4 prison guards looked at Yixian with a grin. As he spoke, he rubbed his hands non-stop, appearing to be extremely excited. Some fellows have already served this old man before, but in the end they didn't get anything out of him. You're new here, so perhaps you don't know that there is actually a rule in our Myriad Nets prison. Every prison guard team can only attack once. If they fail, they won't have another chance in the future. So this time we brothers must use all our skills. This old man is a tough nut to crack. In a moment, the 4 of us will take turns attacking. With our methods, this old man most likely won't be able to withstand. If there are any good treasures, we'll obediently take them out and offer them to him. Of course, if the 4 of us don't succeed, Brother Yi can also give it a try if you're itchy. Just treat it as accumulating experience. In a moment, this old brother will attack first. You can learn from the side. When it comes to torturing prisoners, this old brother's methods are ranked at the forefront in the entire Myriad Nets prison. After saying that, the tall and thin man turned to look at the green-bearded old man in the cage. His eyes widened as he laughed sinisterly. Old man, I know you're a tough nut to crack, but today is different from the past. This old man is the 3rd-ranked torturer in Myriad Nets prison. If you don't want to suffer physical pain, you'd better obediently hand over all your treasures. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude. Pa! After saying that, the tall and thin man waved his right hand. A long red whip that seemed to be refined from the tendons of some kind of star beast suddenly slashed through the void, making a crisp and ear-piercing sound. Yixian's face immediately darkened. If he really allowed this tall and thin man to torture Old Man Lu in front of him, he would either not be able to hold back and directly attack, or he would be too ashamed to face anyone. Neither of these situations was what Yixian wanted to see. Why don't you let me try first? I'm good at a kind of mental charm technique that attacks the heart. If I can make this old man surrender without shedding a drop of blood, we can save some energy, right? Chapter 2651. Chapter 2651. Chapter 2651. Chapter 2651. Hundreds respond to a single call. Are you really confident? The tall and skinny man hesitated for a moment, then sized up Yixian a few more times before nodding. Alright, since Brother Yi is interested, we'll let you try first. If it doesn't work, then we'll make a move. As for whether or not he's at the end of his life, you don't have to worry about that. If he dies, then he dies. With that, the tall and skinny man signaled to Yixian with his eyes and retreated to the side with the other 3 demon prison guards. This was clearly a signal for Yixian to make his move now. Cough, cough. Yixian coughed twice and braced himself to glare at Old Man Lu, who was in the cage. While he pretended to release a burst of mental power that turned into a storm at Old Man Lu, he slowly said in a strange tone, Old man, I know you're tough, but you're unlucky to have met me today. You better hand over the treasure, or I'll make you cut off your green beard and stick it to your head so that you can crawl on the ground like a turtle. Do you believe me? These words were really too vicious. If that was really the case, wouldn't he become a green-haired turtle? Even the 4 demonkin wardens who had retreated to the side jumped in fright when they thought of that satisfying scene. The way they looked at Yixian immediately changed. He could even think of such a sinister and shameless method. This brat was really ruthless. However, in a place like Myriad Cataclysm, ruthlessness and viciousness were required. Unknowingly, the 4 of them had a whole new level of respect for Yixian. To be able to have such a temperament as soon as he arrived, his future was limitless. In fact, apart from the 4 men, even Old Man Lu in the cage was shocked. His old face turned green in an instant. Although he knew that Yixian didn't have the ability to do so, the situation was in front of him now. He could only fold his arms and quit, fall out with Yixian on the spot, and go their separate ways. Otherwise, they could only play along with him and allow this brat to quickly gain influence in the circle of demon prison guards. Since that was the case, if he chose the latter, and if he still didn't express his stance, wouldn't he have no choice but to clench his teeth and bend over to learn how to crawl on the ground like a tortoise if this Yi brat was really forced into a corner? Thinking of this, Lu Wenshuan's expression instantly changed. Without thinking, he quickly said, Wait, I won't lower myself to your level. Isn't it just some worldly possessions? I'll give it to you. Hurry up and scram. Don't bother me again. As he spoke, he flipped his hand and took out a small space box. With a cold snort, he directly threw it out of the cage. All of this was within Yi Xian's expectations, but even so, he still put on an act and said a bunch of empty words. In short, he was very proud of himself. On the other hand, the four men who had already retreated to the side were so shocked that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets when they saw that the matter was so simple. After being stunned for a long time, the four of them trembled and came back to their senses. When they looked at Yi Xian again, there was nothing but admiration in their eyes. The demon wardens of the myriad hell were all brawn and no brains to begin with. In order to reap the benefits from the captives in the cages, they would often do their best every time. Only after a great deal of effort would they be able to reap the rewards. Moreover, not every time could they get what they wanted. More often than not, it was actually a waste of effort. But Yi Xian in front of them only moved his lips a few times, and almost without any effort, he directly took down the old man in the cage who was famous for his stubbornness. If they hadn't seen all this with their own eyes, the four men would have never believed it. This newcomer in front of them seemed to have inadvertently opened a door, allowing them to see a new world. So the so-called interrogation by torture can be played like this? As long as you grasp the opponent's mentality and grasp their weakness, you can achieve your goal by just moving your lips. This so-called psychological attack is actually so magical. As these thoughts flashed through their minds, the four men were completely convinced by Yi Xian. Or rather, what they were amazed by was actually Yi Xian's way of handling things. Soon, the treasures and various rare materials in the small space box handed over by Old Man Lu were directly divided among the five of them. After tasting the sweetness, the tall and thin man seemed to be unsatisfied and took the initiative to suggest that they should strike while the iron was hot and try another cage. At the same time, Brother Yi could also familiarize himself with the tactics of psychological attacks on these prisoners. The latter secretly complained in his heart, but he couldn't refuse. In desperation, he could only find a cage nearby and repeat the same trick. Fortunately, the person being held in this cage was clearly an understanding person. He had indeed seen everything that had happened before. Moreover, this person was clearly surprised and shocked that Yi Xian was able to successfully infiltrate the Devil Cultivator jailer. At the same time, he understood the severity of the matter. Therefore, after Yi Xian secretly used his divine sense to ask the other party to cooperate and promise that if there was a chance to escape, he would find a way to help him escape, this person only hesitated for a moment, and then silently cooperated as if he had accepted his fate. Of course, when dealing with this guy, Yi Xian used a different set of words. Basically, after examining the other party, he directly picked out a ready-made outstanding characteristic. The result was without suspense. After succeeding twice in a row, the tall and thin four people were completely convinced by Yi Xian, and simply regarded him as a celestial being. In the next 10 days or so, Yi Xian gradually found the feeling. Using the same method, he succeeded time and time again. As for the Devil Cultivator jailers that followed behind him, from the initial 4 thin and tall people, gradually increased to 20 to 30 people. Every time Yi Xian walked out of the edge of the black prison, where the prison guards lived, there would always be a large group of demon cultivator experts behind him. Unknowingly, his reputation had already spread throughout the myriad heaven prison, and for a moment, his reputation was boundless. Even among the entire group of devil prison guards, his words already had a certain level of prestige. Not to mention that 100 people would respond to his call, at least on the surface. When the other prison guards saw Yi Xian, they would basically greet him with a smile, and flatter him with the intention of flattering him. After all, from the beginning until now, every time he made a move, he would more or less be able to achieve something and had never failed. The significance of all this, in addition to the specific benefits, was more so that the other devil prison guards unknowingly developed a sense of fear and dread towards Yi Xian from the bottom of their hearts. However, this kind of recent situation did not make Yi Xian conceited. In fact, for the past 10 days, he had been secretly paying attention to the movements of the prison guard commander who rarely showed himself. Right now, he could be considered to be quite famous among the entire group of devil prison guards. Under such circumstances, if Yi Xian made a move against the prison guard commander, he was confident that the other prison guards would not react too violently. Chapter 2652. Level 8 Star Core Realm. The warden commander of Myriad Luo Prison was called He Ta. As his name suggested, his skin was dark, and he was as tall as a tower. He was a strength-type demon expert, and his cultivation was at the level 8 star core realm. Although the cultivation realms of demon experts were the same as that of the Myriad Luo Federation, their cultivation methods were different. They were not like the human race's technology faction, which used gene cultivation fluids to unlock the potential of the human body and cause mutations in the genes to increase their cultivation. They were also not like the human world's cultivation faction, which had all kinds of cultivation methods that focused on the divine sense and body tempering as support. Demon experts did not have divine sense, but they had powerful mental energy that was similar to divine sense. Their cultivation was mainly focused on condensing mental energy and body tempering as support. Of course, there were many demon experts who focused on body tempering and used condensing mental energy as support. For example, the warden commander of Myriad Luo Prison, Heita, was one of them. Although Heita mainly focused on body tempering and looked like a boorish man, his temperament was the exact opposite. Not only did he not belong to the bold and straightforward type, he was incomparably feminine. It had been more than 10 days since Yixian had snuck into the demon prison guards, but he had only seen him 2 or 3 times from afar. Moreover, every time he saw him it was a hurried glance. Not to mention chatting with each other. He hadn't even come into close contact with him. As the commander, it was naturally impossible for the Black Tower's residents to be together with all the other devil cultivator jailers. It was an independent hut that was quite far away from the area where the jailers lived. The middle was empty, and if Yixian wanted to go over, he would be discovered the first time. At the moment, he could not find a suitable reason to approach Heita. Helpless, Yixian could only choose to let Heita come to him. The method was very simple. He just had to take all the spoils of war from the Federation experts. According to the rules of Myriad Luo Prison, 70% of the spoils had to be handed over. Heita had a trusted aide who would take the initiative to collect the spoils every time a patrol squad of demon experts reaped some spoils. Yixian's plan was to use this guy to force the Black Tower Council to take the initiative to find him. In order to ensure that nothing would go wrong, he decided to raise his cultivation base to the 8th level of the core realm first. In order to succeed, he didn't care if his foundation wasn't stable enough for now. On this day, after returning from his patrol, Yixian greeted the more than 30 demon dwellers and then entered his own hut to begin his closed-door training. This time, in order to save time, he directly threw out a pile of level 7 purple star core origin. Then, with the help of the Devouring system, he quickly began to absorb the star core origin energy in them. After nearly a day and a half, when an entire cube of level 7 purple planetary core had been drained, Yixian finally heard the notification of the Devouring system in his mind. Ding! Congratulations to the host for leveling up. Current level. Level 8 core state. In just one day, he had directly stepped into the 8th level from the 7th level of the core realm. This speed was something that even the genius disciples of the great clans in the capital planet could only look up to. Feeling the majestic power in his body that had increased by at least several times, Yixian tightly clenched his fists. At this moment he was very proud of himself. Soon after concealing his aura once again, Yixian stood up and waved his hand to remove the simple isolation formation that he had set up before he started his training. He then stepped out of the hut. When the 30 over-demon cultivator followers had all arrived, Yixian waved his hand and led the group of fellows towards the cage area outside. This time, he purposely picked a few more targets, so the harvest was much better than before. The more than 30 demon dwellers who followed him were all grinning from ear to ear. It was only 30% and they were already satisfied with it. The key was that such a good thing did not happen every day. Before Yixian came, they could only get it once or twice a month. While these people were laughing foolishly and looking at the treasures in their hands, Yixian had a thoughtful look on his face as he played with a small space box in his hand. Inside was the 70% of the harvest that had to be handed over to the tower. Brothers, I heard that the tax collected from our Myriad prison is only 50%, right? As for the other 30%, it was all taken by the Black Tower? Yixian suddenly asked tentatively, and turned to look at the more than 30 demon dwellers. These words obviously surprised them, and the smiles on their faces disappeared. They even looked around carefully to make sure that there were no Black Tower subordinates nearby. Then they lowered their voices and quietly reminded Yixian. Boss, it's fine as long as you keep this in your heart. Don't talk about it. That's right. Not only is the Black Tower's face black, but his heart is even blacker. We can only swallow this matter. Who told him to be the warden commander? The key is that he's also very strong. He's an 8th level core realm cultivator. TSK. Even if we fight side by side, we won't be his match. Hearing these words, Yixian knew what was going on. He did not continue to say anything. Nodding, he led these people back to the tower. As soon as he returned to the warden's area, 2 Black Tower subordinates swaggered up to him. They had gotten used to it recently. Every time Yixian returned from his patrol, these 2 fellows would be waiting for him for a long time. After all, they could more or less get a share of the 20% tax that the Black Tower deducted. Give it to me. When they got close, one of them stretched out his hand in front of Yixian and said with a slightly arrogant tone, "How's today's harvest? I say, kid, don't be lazy. If you have this ability, you have to make good use of it. Who knows, maybe one day Lord Black will promote you to be his confidant and nurture you." In other words, he was clearly saying that he was superior to others. Not to mention Yixian and the 30 over prison guards behind him. Even the other prison guards who were strolling nearby had expressions of displeasure on their faces after hearing this. However, they didn't dare to say anything despite being angry. Yixian saw all of this and sneered in his heart. However, his face suddenly darkened. He opened his mouth and scolded. "Who do you think you are? How dare you speak to me in such a tone? Get out of here as soon as possible. Otherwise, when I change my mind, you won't have the chance to get out of here." "You!" The Black Tower subordinate was dumbfounded. He stared blankly at Yixian, unable to recover his senses for a moment. The other wardens around them all sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at each other in surprise. They were all shocked. As for the 30 wardens who had taken advantage of Yixian's benefits, after a moment of hesitation, they gritted their teeth and stepped forward to stand behind Yixian. Chapter 2653. Superior. Good, Yi, your wings have hardened and you want to fly, right? The 2 Black Tower's subordinates gritted their teeth in anger. But in the end, they didn't dare to make a move. They turned around and ran towards Black Tower's small house. "Just you wait, Lord Black will definitely skin you alive." As soon as the 2 guys left, the 30 or so prison guards behind Yixian all swarmed over with worried expressions. "Boss, are you really planning to go against Black Tower? It's not that I'm discouraging, but the chances of success are practically zero." "That's right, it's not that we're afraid of death. But the problem is that we know there's no hope yet, we're still blindly trying. I'm really unwilling. If there's a chance, then it's fine, but Black Tower is an 8th stage powerhouse, and we're all 3rd stage and 4th stage powerhouses here. Even if we fight with our lives on the line, we won't have a chance. Just leave Black Tower to me. Don't worry, I basically won't need you guys to make a move." Faced with these tactful words of advice, Yixian only smiled mysteriously, then turned to look in the direction of Black Tower's small house. In his line of sight, a muscular black man who was at least 2-3 meters tall was striding over with a ferocious expression on his face. Behind him were the 2 trusted devil cultivators. At this moment, the 2 fellows seemed to feel that they had found a backer, and their faces were full of pride. "I heard that you refused to pay the 70% tax?" As he walked closer, Black Tower crossed his arms and stood several meters away. Due to him being an entire head taller than Yixian, his gaze was completely condescending as he examined Yixian from above. His expression was filled with ridicule and ridicule. "It's not that I refuse to pay the tax, but 70% is a bit of a problem. I heard that the higher-ups clearly take 50% from myriad hell." Yixian didn't back down, and made Black Tower lose face on the spot. "As the leader of the prison guards, it's fine if you don't seek benefits for your brothers, but you actually secretly take away 20% of the profit. Isn't this too evil? You really live up to your name. You're courting death. Puny 3rd stage ant, what right do you have to question this leader?" The Black Tower was humiliated and immediately flew into a rage. With a roar, it swung its fist towards Yixian's chest. As expected of a body-tempering demon cultivator, who pursued the pinnacle of strength, this punch appeared to be simple, but it clearly carried with it the rumbling of thunder. and even ripples and waves appeared in the space, as if it was a force that could break through all techniques with one blow. It must be known that the myriad cataclysmic hell had been constructed by the Heaven's Legacy race through the use of spatial folding technology, so the space within was extremely complex and stable. Even the green-bearded old man's treasure with the function of teleportation could not help him break through the binding power of this folded space. Just this alone was enough to show how terrifyingly stable this space was. And now, with just a casual punch from the Black Tower, even such a stable hell prison was faintly shaken. Even Yi Xian was rather surprised by this. However, he was merely a little surprised. It was impossible for him to be intimidated by the might of his opponent's punch. A third-order ant? I think you're just a blind dog. With a sudden roar, Yi Xian's figure retreated, and at the same time, his concealed cultivation completely erupted. A majestic pressure that was comparable to the Black Tower's instantly spread out from his body, shocking the surrounding demon cultivator prison guards who were watching the battle and causing them to cry out in surprise. Even the expression of the Black Tower on the other side slightly changed under the pressure of the realm that suddenly spread out. After its punch missed, it immediately withdrew its attack and stood several meters away. It sized Yi Xian up from head to toe. You really did conceal your cultivation? But so what if you're 8th order? Do you know why this commander chose the path of body tempering? Humph! We demons are not only born with powerful mental strength, but more importantly, we have a strong resistance to this kind of power. So, the battle between demons is basically a battle of strength. Although you're also 8th order, you're not a body-tempering cultivator, so you can't shake me with just your mental strength. Die! With the last roar, the expression on the Black Tower's face became malevolent again. His shoulders shook slightly, and another fierce punch came flying towards Yi Xian. You're simply hopelessly stupid. Hearing that the other party had chosen the path of body tempering because of this, Yi Xian was speechless. He curled his lips and sneered. Today, I'll let you see how strong the profound changes of mental strength are when it's cultivated to a high level. Boom! Before he finished speaking, a vast and invisible mental strength surged out from Yi Xian's body, turning into a tornado-like mental storm. It also stirred up the sound of thunder and rumbled towards the Black Tower. Pooh! With the sudden arrival of this mental storm, the Black Tower who was punching out suddenly paused. With a miserable expression, he actually opened his mouth and spat out an arrow of blood. Then with his eyes wide open, he fell straight on his back. His body smashed onto the ground with a loud bang. After that, there was no more movement. It was as if there was no aura, and he had already fallen. This is the terrifying part of mental strength that has been cultivated to a high level. Even a demon cultivator can't be completely immune. Their entire brain will be destroyed in an instant. It would be strange if they didn't die. Seeing the Black Tower fall, Yi Xian's heart relaxed, but he still covered up some things in his words. The reason why the Black Tower was killed by his one blow was obviously not because Yi Xian's mental strength was so strong, but because he secretly wrapped a strand of a human cultivator's divine sense in this vast mental storm. Although the demon cultivator's mental strength was so strong that it could block the detection of a human powerhouse's divine sense and couldn't enter their brain at all, with the cover of the mental strength wrapped outside, Yi Xian's strand of divine sense easily entered the Black Tower's brain. After running around for a while, it instantly turned the Black Tower's brain into a pile of paste. If he still didn't die like that, it would really be unreasonable. Of course, this method was useless against human cultivators. After all, human powerhouses still had their primordial spirits. If their brain was damaged, they could just leave their primordial spirits and take over another body to cultivate again. After casually covering up a few words, Yi Xian turned his head and looked at the demon cultivator prison guards around him. At this moment, all of them were in a petrified state without exception. They stood there with their mouths wide open, staring straight at the Black Tower lying on the ground. A powerful devil cultivator of the 8th step actually died so easily? Even if they saw all this with their own eyes, they still couldn't accept it in a short time. It was too shocking, and they didn't dare to imagine it. Cough cough. Everyone, don't worry. Now that the Black Tower is dead, although we still have to pay the taxes in the future, it's impossible for us to pay 70%. Chapter 2654. Settling accounts after autumn. This was a clear indication that Yi Xian was going to take over. Though the hundreds of guards around him were weak, they weren't stupid. One of them raised his arms and shouted, "What else is there to choose from? Brother Yi is the best choice. I'll be the first to beat the shit out of anyone who dares fight." The other guards chimed in, and for a time, a wave of cheers erupted in support of Yi Xian. In the end, there was no suspense. Yi Xian had become the commander of all the prison guards in the Myriad Heaven prison. From this moment onwards, he was fully deserving of being in control of the entire Myriad Heaven prison, enough to cover the sky with one hand. However, this power was only effective within the confines of the prison. It was only effective to the prisoners and guards within the confines of the prison. Forget leaving all heaven. There was no way they could go anywhere else. Even the devil cultivator experts that occasionally entered the Myriad Heaven prison from other regions wouldn't be too interested in Yi Xian's so-called status as a prison guard commander when facing him. But none of that mattered to him. For Yi Xian, the only thing left to do was to scavenge for materials for the formation. Then he'd ask Lu Wenxuan to help him repair the portal he'd carved into Starship's hull. Once that was done, he had to leave all heaven. No matter what, he had to leave this folded space where even the portals couldn't break through. Only then would he have a chance to escape this space fortress. Very quickly, when the news of Yi Xian successfully killing the Black Tower and becoming the controller of the Myriad Heaven prison spread, the entire Myriad Heaven prison was completely shaken. The Federation experts in the nearly 10,000 cages were all extremely excited. The person who controlled the Black Prison had become one of the Federation's own people, and the hope of leaving this place finally saw a glimmer of hope. That afternoon, Yi Xian came alone to Lu Wenxuan's cage. He was clearly excited. "Senior, how is it? I didn't disappoint you, did I? I said I'd take you out, and I'll do it. Where are we now? Don't celebrate too early." Old Man Lu was not as happy as Yang Kai expected and instead seemed a little indifferent, his expression indifferent as he continued. "You came here this time to ask this old master about the various materials needed to repair the starship, right? I've already made a list. You've also gathered a lot of good things recently. See if you can get them all." After speaking, Old Man Lu handed out a jade slip used to imprint spiritual energy information. After Yi Xian received it, he immediately released his spiritual energy to examine it. There weren't many things inside, but among all the treasures he and the group of demon prison guards had recently collected, there weren't many kinds of refining materials. He could barely gather about half of what he needed. After returning to the prison guard captain's cabin in the Black Tower, Yi Xian rummaged through it and finally found a few small spatial boxes. Inside were all kinds of treasures and rare materials. It seemed like this guy was really rich, but now all of it had benefited Yi Xian. All the treasures and materials were stored in the undying world within his body. From the Black Tower's secret stash, Old Man Lu had gathered about half of the list. In the end, there were only 7 or 8 materials left. Helpless, Yi Xian could only gather all the demon prison guards and directly ask them if they had the materials. Needless to say, he was just trying his luck. Who would have thought that Yi Xian would actually be able to obtain 2 of the materials? At this point, there were only 5 materials left on the entire list. The demon prison guards had already cleaned out everything, so there was absolutely no hope. Since that was the case, it seemed like he could only think of a solution from the Federation powerhouses imprisoned in the cages. Yi Xian didn't waste any time and directly left the cabin. He returned to the area where Old Man Lu's cages were, and directly walked towards a cage not far to the east. When Yi Xian was preparing to walk out of his cage, there were many people in the surrounding cages who didn't hide their ridicule and mockery. The person in the cage in front of him was one of them. When it came to extortion, one naturally had to pick on those who were not pleasing to the eye. The person in the cage was a middle-aged human male. His strength wasn't bad, as he was actually at the 5th major realm, the 8th order planet realm. At this moment, when he saw Yi Xian directly walking towards him, he immediately stood up and forced a smile. He then cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist Yi, that day. Don't mention that day. It's not a good thing to be ridiculed by others. This Yi has long forgotten." Yi Xian directly interrupted him. Not only was his face expressionless, but his tone was also quite unfriendly. It was obvious that he was being sarcastic. Even a fool could tell. The middle-aged man in the cage immediately felt awkward. He smiled awkwardly but didn't dare to continue explaining. Although Yi Xian's cultivation and strength weren't up to his standards, he was now the actual ruler of the myriad hell after all. Not to mention that if there was any hope of escaping in the future, it would most likely fall on him. Just based on his identity as a prison guard commander, if he really had a grudge against him, he only had to give the order, and those demon prison guards would definitely come to serve him every day. This wasn't a good thing. Because of this, even though he knew that Yi Xian must have come to settle scores with him, the middle-aged man could only pinch his nose and accept it. At this moment he smiled apologetically and reached out to hand a small space box to Yi Xian. This Su was indeed in the wrong before. I didn't recognize you. I hope, fellow Taoist, you won't bear a grudge. This is a small token of my appreciation. If fellow Taoist Yi doesn't accept it, then you won't forgive this Su. In other words, if Yi Xian were to accept this small spatial box, then the matter from before would be written off. If he were to make things difficult for him in the future, then it would be a bit too shameless. Yi Xian glanced at the other party with a playful look in his eyes, then quietly received the small spatial box. He immediately sent his divine sense into check, and after seeing that the various treasures and materials inside were indeed not bad, and the amount was also quite shocking, he nodded his head in satisfaction, then turned around and left. For half an afternoon, Yi Xian went around the dozen or so cages where the mocking voice came from. These guys were quite tactful and took out a lot of good things to show their respect to Yi Xian. They only wanted to spend money to avoid disaster and have a few more days of peace. After counting all the treasures in the dozen or so small spatial boxes, the last 5 materials missing from Old Man Lu's list were finally gathered. Yi Xian let out a long breath and placed all the materials into a small spatial box. Then, he returned to Old Man Lu's cage and handed the small spatial box over to him along with the battleship that he had put away earlier. Fortunately, all the materials have been gathered. Senior, may I ask when you can start repairing it? When the middle-aged man reached out to take the small space box, Yi Xian politely cupped his hands. This warship is very important to me. Please take care of it. Yi Xian is very grateful. Chapter 2655. Crazy fusion brat, you're not thinking of using it to escape from Myriad Prison, are you? Old Man Lu stared at Yi Xian strangely before shaking his head and smiling bitterly. Didn't I tell you before? This black prison uses space folding technology, making it like an independent world. Teleportation arrays are useless, you can only wander around inside, there's no way you can break out. You better give up. Regarding this, Yi Xian didn't explain much and just laughed it off. What surprised him was that this time the repair took a full 3 days. Fortunately, this Old Man Lu really did have some ability. 3 days later, when the small space box containing Shifting Star was returned to Yi Xian, the teleportation array engraved on the battleship's hull was completely completed. Once the teleportation array was activated, the battleship would be teleported away with Yi Xian, unlike before, when he left but the battleship was left behind. After thanking Old Man Lu, Yi Xian immediately returned to his commander's cabin and stored the battleship into his body. Then, he took out the hidden purple shuttle from his undying world and placed them together before issuing the command to the system for the 4th fusion. Ding! Discovered fusion treasures. Hidden purple shuttle Shifting Star. Ding! Beginning the 4th fusion progress 1. With the system's prompt in his mind, the 4th fusion of the hidden purple shuttle had finally begun. Yi Xian let out a long sigh of relief and felt much more relaxed, as if a knot in his heart had been removed. After this fusion, not only would the previously exposed hidden purple shuttle's appearance change again, but it would also have a perfect teleportation array in addition to the energy shield and speed array. When the time came, it would be equivalent to having the ability to teleport. Even in the interior of an administrative planet like Sky River Star, in case of a great crisis, Yi Xian could directly teleport away, which was very significant. Compared to the previous 3 fusions, this 4th fusion obviously took more time. Yi Xian waited anxiously for a full 4 days before the long-awaited prompt of the Devouring system finally sounded in his mind. Ding! Congratulations, Yi Xian, the 4th fusion is a success. Warship obtained. Purple Star Shuttle. Yi Xian instantly became excited. He immediately sent out his divine sense and excitedly examined the Purple Star Shuttle that had changed its name again. Although the new battleship was still light purple in color, its appearance was completely different from the previous purple hidden shuttle. However, the smooth lines from before were still preserved. In addition, the obscure array runes engraved on the hull of the battleship were more detailed and complicated, revealing a simple and heavy mysterious aura. As for the performance index of the battleship, besides the perfect teleportation function, the level of the energy shield had also been slightly improved, and the speed had also been increased. Even the 2 star cannons at the bow and stern of the battleship had been integrated into one. The diameter of the cannon muzzle had been increased by 50%, from 10 m before to 15 m now. With the cannon muzzle wider, the power of the star cannons had obviously increased by a large margin. Even the planetary-grade battleships of the Federation military would not be a match for Yixian's Purple Star shuttle. Although they were both star cannons, one had a diameter of 10 m, while the other had a diameter of 10 m, and the other had a diameter of 15 m. The difference in power was obvious. After putting away the Purple Star shuttle, Yixian quickly took out his weapon and armor, the Meteorite Essence Sword and the Glazed Starlight armor. The Purple Star shuttle had now been successfully fused for the 4th time, but Yixian's weapon and armor had only been fused twice. Previously, Yixian did not have the time to fuse them, and he also lacked suitable treasures to fuse them with. However, things were different now. Recently, Yixian had collected a large number of treasures and rare materials from the myriad hells, so he had enough to fuse them a few more times. As for the weapon for the 3rd fusion, Yixian chose a red mineral called the Demonic Blood Heavenly Crystal. It was about the size of a fist, sparkling and translucent, and gave off a demonic aura. As for the armor, Yixian chose a special metal called the Indestructible Purple Phoenix Gold. It was slightly purple in color, and although it was not very hard, this metal had a miraculous self-healing ability. This was where the name Indestructible came from. If this metal was fused into the armor, once it was damaged in battle, there was no need for Yixian to refine it after the battle. The armor would quickly repair itself while the battle was still going on. After choosing these 2 minerals and metals, Yixian once again returned his divine sense to the undying world in his body, and carefully selected from the pile of treasures. In the end, he took out an offensive artifact and a special armor. He planned to use these 2 treasures for the 4th fusion. The offensive artifact was not a sword, but a small and exquisite green chisel called the Barrier-Breaking Shuttle. It had the miraculous effect of ignoring space, and had an extremely strong penetrative ability towards all kinds of array formations and barriers. If it was fused into the Meteoric Essence Sword, there was a high possibility that it would have the effect of teleportation. This made Yixian feel a rush of excitement. As for the armor to be used for the 4th fusion, it was actually a light purple veil called the Misty Jade Smoke Net. This item was originally not part of the category of armor, but was a veil-like defensive artifact. After it was used, it would transform into a light purple veil. Not only did it have the ability to defend, it could also emit a faint purple mist to achieve the effect of concealment. After fusing it into the armor, Yixian could summon the purple mist to wrap around his body. It was the most suitable item for concealment in certain special situations. After choosing the 4 treasures and materials to be used for the fusion, Yixian immediately began the frenzied fusion. The large sword and the armor were still fused at the same time. The 3rd fusion took a total of 4 days. After it was completed, Yixian did not stop and immediately began the 4th fusion. This time it took a total of 8 days to complete. Following that, the Devouring system's notification sounded in his mind again. Ding! Congratulations to the host for the 4th fusion success. Obtained weapon: Demonic Bloodstar Essence Sword. Ding! Congratulations to the host for the 4th fusion success. Obtained armor: Purple Phoenix Glass Armor. Yixian's spirits were lifted, and he immediately began to check the results of the fusion. The Demonic Bloodstar Essence Sword's appearance was roughly the same as the Meteoric Essence Sword from before. It was just that the black sword body was covered with a layer of blood-red vein-like patterns, revealing a strange feeling. Because of the existence of this layer of demonic blood veins, when this sword was used to kill in the future, it could absorb the blood essence of the enemy and slowly increase its quality. It could already be considered a growth-type attack artifact. Chapter 2656. Translator, Transin Editor. Transit escaping from the Black Mosquito after spending a period of time, Yixian finally completed the fourth fusion of the battleship, weapon, and armor. These three extremely important treasures. During the 4 consecutive fusions, not only did the 3 treasures devour or absorb several treasures and rare materials of the same type, but the amount of star core origin consumed during the fusions was already a terrifying number. Normal cultivators couldn't bear such a terrifying consumption. As for people like Zhao Long and Bai Zhengying who had extraordinary status and wealth, they could be considered as starry sky level nouveau riche. Even if they were rich, they did not have such an ability. The ability to fuse treasures that came with the Devour system was something that most of the top refiners in the cultivation camp couldn't do. At the very least, they couldn't do it so casually and easily. It was obvious how precious the treasures in Yixian's hands were after 4 fusions. Even the treasures of the same type in the Myriad Luo Federation's contribution point exchange vault couldn't compare to these 3 treasures, not to mention that they had only completed the 4th fusion. If Yixian came across suitable treasures and materials in the future, he could fuse them again and again at any time. In fact, even now, among the various treasures in his hands, there were many treasures that could be selected for fusion, but now these 3 treasures had all completed the 4th fusion and become super superb starry sky level treasures. Their value was already different from before. In addition, Yixian's standards were also high. Normal treasures of the same type couldn't move him anymore. If he chose some treasures with mediocre attributes and forcibly fused with them for the 5th time, he was afraid that the effect would be the opposite of what he wanted. For now, the attributes of these 3 treasures were enough for him to use for a while. At least it was enough for him in the core origin stage. Therefore, Yixian decided not to fuse with them for the time being. He would consider it again after he reached the core origin stage. He had just made a breakthrough in his cultivation before he killed Black Tower. It wouldn't be good to force another breakthrough in a short period of time. Otherwise, he would leave behind an unstable hidden danger. Since he couldn't fuse with the treasures, his cultivation couldn't continue to break through. For a time, Yixian suddenly felt relaxed. It had been more than a month since he was captured in this Myriad Luo hell. To avoid any unexpected changes, Yixian decided to try and see if he could find a way to escape. Regarding the internal situation of this space defense fortress, he had already learned about it by beating around the bush while leading the group of demon prison guards to search for treasures. There were a total of 10 space fortresses in the demon cultivator race, and the one Yixian was in was called the Black Mosquito. The highest commander was a small leader of the demon cultivator race, called Mount Naibua. He was the one who captured Yixian into the Myriad Black Prison. His cultivation was extraordinary, and he was a supreme expert at the Black Hole realm. Black Mosquito ship had 4 areas. The lowest level was the Myriad Luo Hell where Yixian was now. The middle part of the space fortress above the Myriad Luo Hell was where the demon scouts lived. The 3rd level from the bottom was where the energy cabin, engine room and so on of this space fortress were located. At the same time, the warehouse for food and the warehouse for all kinds of treasures and rare materials that the demon scouts had collected in the graveyard starfield were also located there. This level was a forbidden area. Except for the direct subordinates of Naibua Mountain, other demons were not allowed to set foot in it. As for the top level, it was where the control center of the Black Stripe ship was located. That level was also the exclusive territory of Naibua Mountain. Even his direct subordinates couldn't go there at will unless they were summoned. There were about 10,000 demon scouts in the entire Black Stripe ship under the command of Naibua Mountain. But in fact, unless they were about to return to the ancestral star field of the demons at the edge of the first universe, there were only about 1,000 or 2,000 demon scouts in the Black Stripe ship under normal circumstances. After all, they didn't cross the wormhole to the graveyard star field to play. They had a mission, so almost all of them spent most of their time in the graveyard star field around the Black Striped ship. They either gathered all kinds of information about the Myriad Luo Federation or excavated the star core origin. Of course, trapping some valuable experts of the Federation was also part of their mission. The nearly 10,000 experts imprisoned in the Myriad Luo Hell were all captured by them one after another. If Yixian wanted to leave the Black Mosquito ship, he had to enter the 2nd level where the demon scouts lived. There were only 2 passages in the Myriad Luo Hell. One was at the bottom. When Yixian was sucked into the Myriad Luo Hell by the mysterious black beam of light, he had taken the main passage. However, This main passage could only be opened and closed by the control center of the top level where Naibwa Mountain was. Although one could leave the Black Mosquito ship directly through this passage and enter the outer universe, there was basically no hope of success. The second passage was a secondary passage. It didn't lead directly to the outer universe, but it was connected to the second level of the Black Mosquito ship where the demon scouts lived. Therefore, if Yi Xian wanted to leave the Black Mosquito ship, he had to enter the second level first and then leave through the passage on the second level. Among the wardens in the entire Myriad Luo Hell, only the warden commander, Black Tower, had the authority to open this secondary passage. However, Yi Xian threw the demon core in his brain to the devouring system for it to be decomposed and devoured. From it, Yi Xian not only obtained a considerable amount of spirit power origin, but also unexpectedly obtained a rune imprint. This rune imprint was the key to opening the second secondary passage. Therefore, if Yi Xian wanted to, he could open the Myriad Luo Hell at any time and enter the second level where the demon scouts lived. After everything was ready, Yi Xian immediately went to Old Man Lu's cage and told him everything. The latter fell into deep thought after hearing this. After a long time, he sighed faintly and shook his head with a bitter smile. Forget it, this old man won't play with you. If that passage leads directly to the outer universe, it's fine, since it leads to the base camp of the demon people. Although this old man's cultivation isn't weak, the inner space of the Black Mosquito ship is filled with a strange black fog. We human cultivators don't even dare to use our divine sense. If I really go with you and meet other demons on the way, it's a small matter if your identity is exposed, but I'm afraid I'll suffer physical pain and be sent back to the Myriad Luo Hell in the end. Upon hearing this, Yi Xian was stunned. Chapter 2657. Chapter 2657. Chapter 2657. The wolf enters the sheep's den. We're different from you. If we want to escape, we'll either have to enter space from the main passage of Tartarus, or we'll have to make the strange black fog disappear. Otherwise, we'll die if we try to force our way through the side passage. Old Man Lu had heard from Yi Xian about the internal situation of the Black Mosquito ship, so he was more or less familiar with it. Thus, he quickly analyzed the situation. Unfortunately, you are only the prison guard commander of this Myriad Heaven prison, and you are not the controller of the entire Black Mosquito ship. You are unable to do either of the two things I just said. Alright, brat, you can go. This old man will stay. Seeing as you didn't leave on your own, and even have the heart to keep your promise and take this old man with you, I can't be too selfish. I know I don't stand a chance, and yet I'm willing to risk it all by following you. This old man can't do that. As he spoke, Old Man Lu produced a small spatial box with a flip of his hand and handed it to Yi Xian. This contains all the treasures and savings this old man has. Keeping it with me will only benefit the demons in the future. To put it bluntly, it's helping the enemy. So take it with you. Remember, if you have the chance in the future, kill as many demons as you can to avenge me. Think of it as a reward for this old man's gift. Yi Xian felt ill at ease when he heard these words. If Old Man Lu really did as he said, knowing full well that the chances were slim, and that Yi Xian would be dragged into this mess, he would still decide to go with him in the end for the sake of a gamble. Then when they reached the second level of the Black Mosquito ship, Yi Xian would definitely abandon him and leave on his own if they ran into other demons and their whereabouts were exposed. After all, he only promised to take Old Man Lu with him. He never said he could guarantee the old man's safety. Since he'd already fulfilled his promise, what could he do if his luck was bad and he failed? I can't stay and die with you, right? However, Old Man Lu obviously didn't intend to do that. Not only did he speak sincerely and directly point out this point, he even planned to give all his treasures and savings to Yi Xian for free. This kind of magnanimity made Yi Xian feel uneasy. If he really took the small space box and turned to leave, what happened today would affect his Dao heart. In fact, even if he didn't take the other party's things, Yi Xian would still hold a grudge. After all, he did receive Old Man Lu's favor, but the promise he made before was not fulfilled. Even if Old Man Lu took the initiative to give up, the fact that Yi Xian owed him could not be erased. Thinking of this, he immediately shook his head and smiled bitterly. You old man have bad intentions. Aren't you trying to make me shake my Dao heart? Forget it, forget it. In order to not be disturbed by the inner demons in the future, I might as well fight to the death today and fight for my life. After saying that, Yixian grinned at Old Man Lu with a strange expression, waved his hand and turned to leave. Damn, old man, wait for me. I'll leave Myriad Hell now, but it won't be long before I come back to save you. It's just that I don't know how long it will take. Don't die first, that would really be a trap. As soon as he finished speaking, Yixian's back had already disappeared into the black fog in the distance. As his figure disappeared into the distance, sighs could be heard from the cages nearby. There was even a hint of disdain mixed in. Obviously, none of the Federation experts imprisoned in these cages believed that Yixian would come back. Unless there was something wrong with their heads, they would do such a stupid thing. The green-bearded old man, Lu Wenxuan, was obviously aware of this as well. He also let out a long sigh. Sigh. Stinking brat is so stupid that it makes one's hair stand on end. Bastard who doesn't take advantage of others. For the sake of face, he doesn't even want cultivation resources. This temperament. Sigh, he's still too inexperienced. He needs to be sharpened. Amidst the sigh, the green-bearded old man Lu Wenxuan flipped his hand and put the small space box back into his body. He turned around and walked back into the cage and sat down cross-legged. Although his face was rather lonely, there was clearly a faint sense of gratification. He grinned and muttered to himself in a self-deprecating manner, but this is also good. At least this old man has something to comfort himself with. I'll use it to deceive myself. Yixian obviously didn't know that the green-bearded old man, Lu Wenxuan, had completely regarded his words as a white lie. At this moment, he had already returned to the demon prison at the edge of Myriad Hell. All of the devil cultivator jailers were summoned. After everyone was gathered, Yixian immediately announced something, indicating that he would be leaving for a few days to attend to some important matters on the second floor of the Myriad Heaven prison. He repeatedly warned these fellows not to cause trouble, or else he would be severely punished when he returned. This wasn't the first time this had happened. In fact, the prison guards were rotated out every year or so. As the leader of the prison guards, the Black Pagoda was often away. As such, when Yixian finished, the other prison guards immediately responded in unison. None of them felt that there was anything wrong with this arrangement. After giving his instructions, Yixian immediately moved. As he thought about it, his figure transformed into a wisp of light as he shot towards the edge of the deepest part of the prison guards area. A few minutes later, Yixian's figure abruptly stopped. He raised his head to look at the empty space in front of him that was about 100 meters tall. He stood there alone, and with a cold glance, it was as if he was looking at the location of a memorial arch. This archway, glowing with a metallic luster, was actually a portal. It was the so-called secondary passage that led from Myriad Hell to the second level of the bastion. Shoo! A faint black light flashed and swiftly sank into the pillar of the archway. In the blink of an eye, it was gone. A demon's psychic energy was like the consciousness of a human cultivator. It could be divided into strands of psychic energy, branded with one's own unique aura, and then shot out. However, the strand of mental energy that Yixian had just sent out was imprinted with the aura of the rune imprint that he'd obtained from the Black Tower's demon cultivator's brain. It was as if he'd used the mother key to create a one-time use child key. As the child key drilled into the pillar of the portal, the archway, nearly 100 meters tall, suddenly lit up with a dark light. There was even a humming sound. The dark light quickly surged and converged. In the space of 2 or 3 breaths, the arched area under the archway was completely filled. The originally empty arched area seemed to have an additional layer of black light. Behind this layer of light was the exit of the teleportation gate. What a miraculous spatial technique! Little lambs, Grandpa Wolf is coming. Chapter 2658. Chapter 2658. Chapter 2658. The hunt begins. Yixian had indeed changed his mind and decided not to leave for the time being. The reason for this decision was not entirely to take the green-bearded old man Lu Wenxuan with him, but more for himself. But the old man's words did remind Yixian, otherwise he may not have made the decision he did now. The old man sighed, saying that Yixian was only a warden of the 10,000 nets, not the leader of the entire Black Mosquito Bastion. So whether it was opening the main passage below the 10,000 nets, or clearing out the strange black fog that pervaded the interior of the Black Mosquito Bastion, He couldn't do either. It was these words that made Yixian's heart jump. An extremely bold, extremely dangerous plan appeared in his mind, but if it succeeded, the rewards would be unimaginable. Just like how he replaced the warden in the Black Tower, he would find a way to get rid of the captive leader, Nabashan. Then he would replace him and take the entire Black Mosquito Bastion for himself. When this thought popped up in his mind, even Yixian himself was shocked. However, after calmly deducing and pondering, Yixian finally clenched his teeth and made a decision. In his opinion, although this matter was extremely dangerous, it wasn't completely impossible. He even thought that the chances of success were at least 40 to 50%. So it was worth a try. After all, if he succeeded, the benefits he would reap would be unimaginable. The temptation was too great. As Yixian's feet planted firmly on the ground and he stepped out of the black light, a large open square appeared in front of him. The square was a regular square, with sides several kilometers long. This alone was more than the diameter of the Black Mosquito Bastion. This indicated that the second layer of space he was in was also constructed using space-folding technology. In other words, Yixian could not directly teleport away and return to the void outside. He was now standing in the center of the square. When he turned around, 3 enormous portals appeared behind him, each one like a 100-meter-long memorial arch. On the other hand, the one that Yixian had just walked out of was at the edge of the spatial door. It was the same as the spatial door on the other side. On the other hand, the spatial door in the middle was clearly different. The runes on the pillars and beams were even more ancient and complicated. After a moment's thought, Yixian roughly guessed where the other 2 portals led. Of the 2 on the outside, one led to the lower 10,000 nets, and the other led directly to the void outside of the bastion. In other words, the portal on the other side was the escape route. However, Yixian didn't plan on trying it out so easily. On one hand, he'd already decided not to leave for the time being, and on the other hand, it was because he wasn't sure if the rune imprint he obtained from the Black Tower's demon core could also open the spatial door that led to the outside of the fortress. If he couldn't, then it would truly be troublesome if he alarmed some existences that he was unable to deal with right now. Even if he wanted to leave, he had to make some inquiries. He had to figure this out before making any plans. As for the portal in the middle, which was more ancient and complex, according to Yixian's estimation, it led to the 3rd layer of the Black Mosquito Bastion above. If that was the case, then Yixian could not touch this portal. At least not now. After examining the 3 portals in a row, Yixian found the key points to distinguish the other 2 portals. After memorizing them, he chose a direction at random and stepped forward. Apart from the 3 portals, there was nothing else in the large square. It was completely empty. But at the edges of the square, there was a straight and extremely wide passageway, several hundred meters long. None of them had an end in sight. Judging from the width of these 4 passageways, there must be other forked passageways in the middle that extended out one by one. If that was the case, then the second layer of the Black Mosquito Bastion was actually a labyrinth-like area divided by a large number of crisscrossing straight passageways. The center of the entire labyrinth should be the large square where Yixian was now. As for the living quarters of those demon scouts, there was no doubt that they should be on the left and right sides of the crisscrossing passageways in the labyrinth. In such a vast and huge labyrinth, there were countless passageways of different sizes. On the left and right sides of each passageway, there could be a secluded cave dwelling. In this way, it was not a problem for the entire second layer of the Black Mosquito Bastion to accommodate more than 10,000 demon scouts. A few minutes later, Yixian left the central square where the portals were and entered the main passageway on the right side of the square. After walking for a few miles, another straight passageway appeared on the left and right. These 2 level 2 passageways were obviously much narrower, but they were still about 200 meters wide. Yixian continued to walk forward until the 6th pair of level 2 passageways appeared. He then turned around and walked to the right. It was the same for the level 2 passageways. Every 2 kilometers, there would be 2 level 3 passageways with a width of about 100 meters. In the previous level 1 and level 2 passageways, there were only crossroads. After reaching the level 3 passageway that was 100 meters wide, although there were still 2 narrower level 4 passageways appearing not far away, along the way, there were already no less than the number of secluded cave mansions on both sides of the passageway. None of the cave dwellings had doors. They were just huge arched entrances on the walls of the passageways. The space inside should be very wide and seemed to be divided into small compartments. Yixian did not stop there. Instead, he turned around and left at the entrance of a level 4 passageway that was about 50 meters wide. There were clearly more cave dwellings on both sides of the level 4 passageway. The arched entrances were densely packed and would appear every 30 to 40 meters. Yixian randomly picked a cave dwelling and walked in with a calm expression. Along the way, Yixian would occasionally see a few demon experts when he passed by some cave dwellings. They also saw him, but none of them noticed anything wrong. They all treated Yixian as one of their own. Therefore, he did not need to be nervous at all. There were more than 10,000 demon scouts in the entire Black Mosquito ship. They were all in a hurry, so who could recognize each other? The reason why he chose this cave abode was actually very simple. This cave abode had the least number of demons he had encountered in the entire Class 4 passageway. There were only 6 demon experts, and their cultivation was not very high. They were all between the first and second levels of the core realm. Yixian was very confident that he could kill them instantly when they reacted. Chapter 2659. Slave Seal. If it was said that every cave abode in the level 3 passageway was a small room, then the cave abodes in the level 4 passageway could only be considered as a large shop. This was a reflection of one's strength and rank. The demon dweller scouts who lived in the small rooms in the level 3 passageway were clearly of higher status and strength. The 4th level tunnels, on the other hand, could only live in a single room. Naturally, their status was lower and their strength weaker. The cave that Yixian entered was about 200 square meters in size. It was empty in the middle, and there was only a huge platform with teleportation runes on it. It should be used to hand in the spoils of war, as well as to receive rewards and daily consumables. Around the walls, there were some metal partitions that extended out from the walls. The space between every 2 partitions was a semi-open, independent small space. In addition to a bed, there was also a small table and a chair. There were a total of 40 or so of these semi-open rooms scattered along the walls of the cave abode, but they were all basically empty. Only the area furthest away from the entrance of the cave abode was occupied by 6 demon scouts. At this time, some of the 6 devil cultivators were lying on the bed, some were sitting cross-legged on the bed with their eyes closed, and some were sitting on a small stool beside the bed, taking inventory of some items. Seeing Yixian enter, the 6 demons only raised their eyes to glance at him before ignoring him. They were still doing what they were supposed to do. Yixian had long since suppressed his power to 2nd level core, similar to these 6. Otherwise, the sudden appearance of an 8th level demon in the 4th level tunnels would have caused an uproar. It was clear that anyone who wanted to live in these bunks was free to do as they pleased. Most of the demonkin scouts were out on missions or mining, and didn't spend much time on the Black Mosquito Bastion. Who would have the time or energy to remember where their bunks were? Yixian didn't bat an eyelid as he walked towards the inner area of the cave where the 6 fellows were. They didn't pay him any attention. After all, this was normal. If there was space inside, who would want to choose a place near the entrance? Although it was half open, as long as it was possible, anyone would subconsciously try to make their personal space as private and quiet as possible. Perhaps these 6 fellows were still dreaming that they would be able to enter the level 3 passageway and live in the level 3 cave abodes with small compartments after their strength increased. Unfortunately, they would never have that chance. Hum! A weak buzzing sound rang out. When Yixian was only a dozen meters away from the 6, he made his move without warning. As he activated the spirit source core in his head with all his might, a wave of majestic spirit energy suddenly gushed out from his body. It was like a rolling river, covering the sky and covering the earth. In an instant, it completely enveloped the 6 demon dweller scouts. This time, Yixian didn't even bother to include a few strands of the human cultivator's consciousness in his psychic power. They were just 6 weaklings. With his strength as a level 8 core ream, he could easily crush them with just the mental strength of the demonkin. In fact, it was indeed so. In the face of Yixian's psychic storm, the 6 demon scouts, who were only 1st or 2nd level core realm, were instantly obliterated. Blood flowed out of their 7 orifices, and they completely lost all signs of life. Seems like I used too much force. Seeing this scene, Yixian was speechless. He was a little worried that the psychic power would shatter the 6 demon scouts' heads. Fortunately, this worry was completely unnecessary. A minute later, 6 small black prismatic crystals appeared in Yixian's palm. They were taken from the 6 demon scouts' heads. As for the corpses, with his current strength, although he couldn't put a Starry Sky rank powerhouse into the undying world in his body, he didn't have any restrictions on corpses that had no signs of life. Yixian had already secretly experimented with this after killing the Black Tower Warden. If it wasn't for this, he might not have dared to make such a decision. He actually treated the second floor of the Black Mosquito ship, the Demon Dweller's Cave, as his own hunting paradise. Ding! Discovered a psychic power core. Would you like to decompose it and extract its source? As Yixian put the 6 demon cores into his body, the notification from the Devouring system sounded immediately. After giving a confirmation, Yixian turned and left the cave, beginning to search for the next batch of prey. Time passed slowly. 3 days had passed without him noticing. In these 3 days, Yixian rejoiced countless times that he finally decided to stay on the Black Mosquito ship and enter the second level of the Demonkin's cave to hunt. Compared to the time when he was searching for demon scouts outside, even the most fruitful time he'd ever been, he'd only killed 3 demon powerhouses. For Yixian, these 3 days were like a beggar who'd suddenly fallen into a bountiful gold mine. In these 3 days, the total number of demon cores he'd collected was a terrifying 947. On average, it was more than 300 cores a day. In other words, over 300 demon scouts had disappeared from the cave every day, dying at the hands of Yixian. Their brains were cut open, and Yixian tossed to the Devouring system to extract their source of psychic power. As for their corpses, they were all thrown into his undying world. Nearly 1,000 demon scouts. This was already a tenth of the total number of demons guarding the Black Mosquito ship. Although there were many demons entering and exiting the second level of the cave every day, no one could find out who had died or left. However, with a tenth of the demon scouts suddenly gone, if one paid attention, one could more or less see that something was amiss. Usually, there were around 2,000 demon dwellers in this area. Sometimes there would be more and sometimes less. But now, after Yizhuan's frenzied hunt, there were at most 1,000 demon scouts left here. More than 70% of the level 4 caves were empty, and they couldn't find a single demon after going through several level 4 tunnels. This situation caused even Yixian to faintly feel that something was wrong. If this continued, and some demons sensed that something was wrong, they'd report it to their superiors. When that happened, they'd be in real trouble. With all this in mind, Yixian decided to stop for now and wait a few days to see what would happen. At the very least, he'd have to wait for the demon population in this area to slowly recover a little. It was also at this moment that the notification of the Devouring system sounded in his mind. Ding! All demon cores have been decomposed. Spiritual power source has begun to feed back. Progress 1. Progress 10. Chapter 2660. Translator. Hinyi Translations Editor. Hinyi Translations The Life and Death Crushing Talisman Slave Imprint? When the Devouring system's notification rang out in his mind, Yixian was stunned at first. Then he suddenly felt a strong sense of joy in his heart. Other things aside, just the fact that the mind source core in his brain could be upgraded was enough to surprise him. Yixian had never thought about this before. Now that he had absorbed the vast and boundless source of mind power that had been extracted from the thousands of demon brain nuclei, his mind source core had unexpectedly upgraded. When the system's notification rang out, Yixian realized that the demon's mind source core actually had this kind of benefit. If that was the case, then in the future, if he were to kill even more powerful demon scouts, the grade of the demon cores he would obtain from their brains should also increase accordingly. This way, Yixian's cultivation speed in terms of the demon's mind power would not decrease continuously as his own level of mind power increased. Of course, the prerequisite was that he had enough demon brain nuclei to extract and decompose them. However, this wasn't something that Yixian planned to ponder over right now. His curiosity had been completely attracted by the new slave imprint ability that had appeared after the upgrade of his mind source core. The so-called slave imprint, as its name implied, was a kind of spiritual imprint used to achieve enslavement. At first, this had just been Yixian's subconscious understanding and strong subjective expectations. However, this understanding was quickly verified. Although Yixian's mind source core and the Devouring system weren't one, The former had already taken root in Yixian's mind and was already inseparable from him. The same was true for the devouring system. In fact, its authority was obviously higher, so it was practically equivalent to the general manager of Yixian's entire body and spirit. Even the treasures that had been absorbed into Yixian's body could be used and manipulated by the devouring system at will. This mind source core, which had already fused with Yixian's body, flesh and spirit, was no exception. In fact, every time he dissected a demon's brain, the large amount of mental power source extracted was automatically fed to the mental power source core in his sea of consciousness by the devouring system. On this point, Yixian had already issued a clear authorization to the system. It could be said that all the changes in the mind source core in his brain were monitored and controlled by the engulfing system. Because of this, Yixian was able to easily understand the specific information about the slave mark through the engulfing system. The so-called slave seal, simply put, was something similar to Tong Lao's life and death talisman. The only difference was that the former's life and death talisman was a thin layer of ice formed by absorbing the water vapor in the air. Yixian's newly obtained ability to condense a slave imprint was directly condensed from the mind source core in his brain. In the end, it was condensed into a spiritual imprint with his own unique aura. It was just like the talisman imprint he had obtained from the head core of the Warden Commander's Black Tower. That talisman imprint was the key used to activate the space gate, while Yixian's slave imprint was used to enslave demons. Once this kind of slave seal entered the devil cultivator's body, it would automatically sense the aura of the devil cultivator's brain, approach it, and finally fuse with it. After that, the devil cultivator would become Yixian's servant, because the spirit core in his brain would be assimilated by the aura of Yixian's slave seal. Moreover, it would be extremely loyal, and it was impossible for him to have a rebellious heart. In order to be freed, the demon would have to die or Yixian would have to take back the slave imprint that had fused with the demon's mind source core. Based on this, Yixian's slave imprint was simply superior to Tong Lao's life and death talisman. They were on completely different levels. It's like a pillow falling from the sky when I'm sleeping. After understanding the specific effects of the slave imprint and the method to condense it, Yixian was so excited that he wanted to roar at the sky. However, when the words reached his mouth, they turned into a low-key murmur. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to continue hunting. I'm afraid that the next few days will be very uncomfortable. With this slave imprint, all the problems will be solved instantly. If I can't kill them for the time being, then I'll just directly enslave them. If I can plant a slave imprint on all the demon scouts here, then the entire second layer of the Black Mosquito ship will undoubtedly fall under my control, just like the first layer of the myriad hells below. The more Yixian spoke, the more excited he became. In the end, he stopped thinking about it and found a demon cultivator's cave that was located in a level 4 passageway. After strolling in, he immediately sat down cross-legged in a corner of the cave, dispelling the chaos in his mind. He focused his mind and activated the power of the spirit core in his sea of consciousness. According to the condensation method that he had long understood, he began to condense the first slave seal. After about 10 minutes, Yixian opened his eyes. His eyes were bright and filled with uncontrollable joy. The process of condensing the slave imprint was very smooth, and could be said to be completed in one go. The reason why the first slave imprint took nearly 10 minutes was entirely because he was overly cautious. He had been very careful and only wanted to be safe, not caring about efficiency. According to the normal speed, with Yixian's current cultivation level in terms of mental power, it would take him about 6 minutes to condense a slave imprint. If he was more familiar with the process to a certain extent, the time could be shortened again. He should be able to succeed in 3 to 4 minutes. In that case, after Yixian was familiar with the process, if he did not sleep at all, Yixian could condense nearly 400 slave imprints a day. Normally, there would only be a little more than 2,000 demon scouts stationed in the second level of the Black Mosquito ship. In other words, Yixian only needed 5 days of continuous condensing to obtain enough spiritual slave imprints to enslave and control all the demon scouts in the second layer of the Black Mosquito ship. However, he obviously did not plan to start now. Since the first slave imprint had been successfully condensed, Yixian could not calm down if he did not immediately test its true effect. He was eager to try and was already impatient. After thinking about it for a while, he finally could not restrain himself and got up to leave the demon cave. He searched the surrounding level 4 passageways, and after a while, he finally saw the figures of 2 demon scouts in a cave. These 2 fellows' cultivation levels were still unbearable to look at. They were only at the 2nd level of the Star Core realm. They were so weak that Yi Xian did not even have the interest to hide it. As soon as he stepped into the cave, he immediately activated the Spirit Source Core in his mind. Wang! Whoosh! In the next moment, a powerful spiritual storm surged out, mixed with a small blackish-purple spiritual imprint that was as small as a hair. Bang! Chapter 2661. Demon Beast Black Mosquito Poof. The saber light flashed, and the head of the demon cultivator on the ground was split into 2 without any suspense. In the mix of red and white things, a small black prismatic crystal was impressively revealed. Then Yi Xian raised his hand and it fell into his palm. Even the little bit of blood on its surface was silently removed as the black crystal floated to Yi Xian's palm. With a flip of his hand, the black demon's brain disappeared in Yi Xian's palm, and was sent into his body to be decomposed by the devouring system to extract the source of its spiritual power. Almost at the same time, Yi Xian casually waved his hand, and the corpse of the demon cultivator scout that had its head cut open strangely disappeared, and was absorbed into the undying world within his body. Not even a drop of blood was left on the ground. All of this took a long time to describe, but in reality the entire process only took 3 to 4 seconds. By now, Yi Xian had killed more than 1,000 demon scouts in the 2nd layer of the Black Mosquito ship. He was already familiar with all the steps. After doing all this, Yi Xian turned his head and swept his gaze to the left. Tu Zhang to the left, a demon dweller scout could be seen. He stood respectfully with his hands clasped behind his back. His head was lowered at a 30-degree angle. His entire person exuded a sense of respect and modesty. This demon scout was the demon slave that Yi Xian had planted the first slave seal to control. Yi Xian coldly glanced at the demon and immediately reminded him, "If there are other demons present in the future, you don't have to be so respectful. Don't expose the relationship between you and me. Do you understand?" "My lord, Barker understands." The demon scout nodded, but his eyes were lowered. He didn't even dare to look straight at Yi Xian. His tone was calm, but there was an unquestionable sense of obedience in his voice. "That's good. You're called Barker, right? I have to say that you're quite lucky. As my first demon slave, when I control the entire Black Mosquito ship in the future, you'll be under one and above all." Seeing that the demon's mind wasn't affected by the slave seal in his spiritual power source core, Yi Xian secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He looked at the demon up and down and threw him a sweet date. Then he continued, "Now tell me everything you know about the Black Mosquito ship." "Thank you, my lord." Barker's face didn't show any surprise. He appeared to be indifferent. He immediately bowed his head slightly again and thanked him respectfully. It wasn't that his temperament was mature and steady, but because of the slave seal's influence, he was now loyal to Yi Xian. Under these circumstances, whether he was a general manager or a small warden, it made no difference to him. Immediately, Barker followed Yi Xian's instructions and told Yi Xian everything he knew about the Black Mosquito Star Fortress. He told Yi Xian everything he knew, no matter how big or small. Although most of the information was obtained by Yi Xian from the demon wardens in the Cataclysm, there was still some information that Yi Xian didn't know or couldn't be sure of. For example, although Yi Xian guessed that the 3 portals in the central square of the 2nd floor of the Black Mosquito ship were connected to different areas, he couldn't be sure of the authority to use the other 2 portals. When he'd killed the 1,000 demon scouts earlier, he'd acted quickly and finished everything in the shortest amount of time. He hadn't had the time to ask about these things. Now that Barker had finished speaking, Yi Xian was reassured. The 3 spatial gates did indeed have different activation methods. Yi Xian already had authority over the one that led to the lower level of the Myriad Abyss. As for the spatial gate in the middle that led to the 3rd level, none of the devil cultivators in the 2nd level actually had the authority to activate it. To have this kind of authority, one had to be at least a demon expert on the 3rd floor or above. Basically, those fellows on the 3rd floor and above could come down at any time. However, it was completely impossible for the demons on the 2nd floor to go up to the 3rd floor through the spatial door. Unless someone came from above to take you with them. In this Black Mosquito Bastion, the first floor of the Cataclysm and the second floor of the Black Mosquito Bastion were like commoner areas. The first floor was used to hold captives, and the second floor housed large numbers of low-level demons like coolies and salesmen. Relatively speaking, the third and fourth levels were the upper echelons of the bastion. Only the best of the best were allowed to enter. They were the most trusted of the bastion's leader, Nabashan. There were only a few hundred of them on the first two floors. These few hundred elites of the Black Mosquito Bastion would not normally go to the first and second floors. Because the third floor was the engine room and storage area, the demons there all had their own duties and responsibilities, and had to stick to their posts. There were even fewer demon elites on the fourth floor. They were either the right-hand men of the leader, Nabashan, or some demon think tanks that he had recruited. They had no contact with the ordinary demons on the lower two floors, and they would not take the initiative to come to this slum for no reason. Only one person was an exception. This person was called Mosquito Butcher. It was said that he had an unspeakable special relationship with the Black Mosquito, the guardian beast of the Black Mosquito Bastion. He held the position of supervisor under Nabashan. In addition, this Mosquito Butcher was arrogant and loved to show off. Because of his unclear relationship with the Black Mosquito, he was despised by the other demons on the first two floors. Because of this guy could only go to the commoner areas below to show off his power. Usually, he would come once or twice a month. Calculating the time, if nothing unexpected happened, he should come in the next 3 to 5 days at most. As for this Mosquito Butcher's cultivation, it was neither high nor low, only fourth-level satellite realm. Fourth-level satellite realm? Hearing this, Yixian's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately frowned. Right now, he was only in the 8th level of the core state. After the core state was the meteor state, and after the meteor state was the satellite state. In other words, the Mosquito Butcher, who was disliked on the first two floors, was almost 2 levels higher than Yixian. Under such circumstances, if the Mosquito Butcher really came to the second floor in the next 3 to 5 days, it would undoubtedly be a huge crisis for Yixian. After all, there were so few demon scouts on the second floor, and this person was fond of showing off, so he would naturally wander around showing off. How could he not see the abnormality? Chapter 2662. Yixian's plan. The Black Mosquito is this bastion's guardian beast. The Black Mosquito is named after it. The other 9 bastions are the same. They all have their own guardian beasts, and they're named after them. Barker bowed to Yixian again, then continued to explain patiently. The ancestral land of the demonkin is at the edge of the first universe. There is a star field that is rich in magical beasts. Some of the demonic energy emitted by the magical beasts is beneficial to our psychic powers. It can increase the rate at which our psychic powers grow. That's why there is a magical beast in every bastion. The black fog that pervades the interior of the Black Mosquito is emitted by the Black Mosquito. We demonkin cultivate and live in this black fog for a long time. It's very beneficial to our psychic powers. In addition, the Black Mosquito isn't only useful for the black fog. It's also very strong. Like the leader of the Black Mosquito Bastion, Nabashan, it's in the black hole realm. It's even stronger than Nabashan. At the very least, Nabashan doesn't dare to provoke it. However, the Black Mosquito was subdued after it was captured. The leader of our ancestral land used psychic powers to control it, and branded it with the psychic imprint. There are 2 of these imprints, one mother and one son. The sun seal is sealed in the Black Mosquito's body, while the mother seal is in the hands of Nabashan, the leader of the Black Mosquito Bastion. However, he can't just use the mother seal to control the Black Mosquito because it will consume a lot of his psychic powers. There's also the possibility that the Black Mosquito will devour him. Only when the bastion is in a special emergency will it be used to defend against the enemy. At this point, Barker retreated to the side and didn't continue speaking. It was clear that this was all he knew about the Black Mosquito magic beast. However, as far as Yixian was concerned, the information he'd said was more than enough. After a moment of silence, Yixian seemed to remember something. He asked, "That's right, where is the Black Mosquito? Is it imprisoned, or can it move freely?" No one dares to imprison a guardian beast. Barker was aware of this, so he explained, "The Black Mosquito magical beast lives in the beast nest. The beast nest is located on the 3rd level above, and it occupies a space all by itself. There is a special space door in the central square of the third level, but other than the black mosquito magical beast, there are only two people who have the authority to enter. One is the small leader Naibwa-shan, and the other is Mosquito Butcher. The black mosquito demonic beast basically doesn't come out of the beast nest space, but the Mosquito Butcher will go in once in a while to serve it. Serve? Hearing this strange word, Yixian frowned. At the very least, demons look like humans from the outside. He found it a little inconceivable that a human would actually serve a magical beast. Yes, to serve. The expression on Barker's face was a little strange, but he still explained in detail. The reason why the Mosquito Butcher is despised by the upper circle of demons in the 2 levels above is because of this. The black mosquito demonic beast is born with a sexual nature. It has to do that kind of thing every once in a while, but ordinary demons can't satisfy it. Before the Mosquito Butcher, one would die almost every year. Then Naibwa-shan would choose a suitable replacement from the demons in the 2nd level. Only the Mosquito Butcher was chosen from the 2nd level 3 years ago. I didn't expect him to be a 3rd-year realm demon beast. Obviously, the black mosquito demonic beast is very satisfied with him. It is also because of this reason that Naibwa-shan will accommodate him to a certain extent and let him be arrogant and despotic. So that's how it is. Yixian immediately came to a realization. With the Mosquito Butcher, Mount Naibwa would be able to avoid losing a demon cultivator subordinate every year. In this kind of situation, it wasn't unacceptable to let this fellow go. It was just that the Mosquito Butcher was actually willing to do such a disgusting thing and seemed to be enjoying it. This character and temperament were really filthy. No wonder he was despised and rejected by the upper 2 levels of this space fortress. Okay, you will guard the central square for the next few days. Once the Mosquito Butcher arrives, inform me immediately. Yixian waved his hand and gave Barker an order. The other party quickly left. Yixian's slave mark had been left in the magic core in his brain. Within a certain distance, the master and servant could use spiritual power to communicate with each other. Therefore, Yixian was not afraid that this guy would not be able to find him and pass on the information. After Barker left, Yixian immediately fell into deep thought. The Mosquito Butcher's arrival was definitely a huge crisis for him. Previously, Yixian just wanted to see if he could hide and lie low until the wind blew over. However, it was different now. He vaguely felt that the black mosquito beast was of great use to him. Since that was the case, he had to get the key mark in the Mosquito Butcher's hand that could allow him to enter the demon nest. In other words, even if the Mosquito Butcher did not come looking for him, he would have to take the initiative to provoke him. However, the other party was a satellite state expert, which was 2 realms higher than Yixian. With his current strength, even if he launched a sneak attack, he would not be able to kill the other party. As for the key mark in the Mosquito Butcher's magic core, he did not even need to think about it. However, besides killing the Mosquito Butcher, Yixian now had another option, which was to use the slave mark to subdue the Mosquito Butcher, just like how he had enslaved Barker. Of course, this method was also dangerous. After all, Barker was only a 2nd-order core state expert, while the Mosquito Butcher was a satellite state expert. The same slave mark would definitely have different effects on the 2 of them. Even if he succeeded in using the slave mark on the other party's body, there was still a possibility of failure. No matter what, I have to give it a try. However, in order to be safe, it would be best to take advantage of the chaos and launch a sneak attack. After muttering to himself for a while, Yixian finally made up his mind. As he muttered to himself, he immediately closed his eyes and started to condense a large number of slave marks in a frenzy. After almost a day, Yixian opened his eyes. After a day of continuous condensing, there were now a total of 100 slave marks in the mind source core in his brain. Among them, 99 were ordinary slave marks, just like the one in Barker's brain. The last one had been specially strengthened by Yixian. Just condensing this strengthened version of the slave mark had taken him a full 2 hours. He intended to use this strengthened version of the slave mark to deal with the Mosquito Butcher. However, before that, there was one more thing that he had to do. Chapter 2663. Arrival of the Mosquito Slayer. This time, Yixian didn't search for his target in the level 4 cave dwellings in the level 4 passageway. Instead, he came to the level 3 passageway. Of course, in order to not attract too much attention, he adjusted his cultivation base to level 4 core star realm. In the level 3 cave dwellings in the level 3 passageway, there were basically demon scouts of level 4 core star realm and above. There were even level 6 demon scouts. Although the strength of the demon scouts in the level 1 passageway had increased compared to the previous level 4 cave dwellings, and the increase wasn't small either. It was at least 2 levels higher. However, to Yi Xian, this wasn't a problem at all. In the beginning, he only searched for demon scouts who were alone or in groups of 2 or 3. Later on, with the protection of other demon slaves and sentries around him, Yi Xian's courage gradually grew. Later on, even if there were 7 or 8 demon scouts together, he still didn't hesitate to attack. 99 slave seals had all been successfully planted. As for Yi Xian's demonic slaves, they had gone from Barker alone to 100. The entire process only took half a day. Such a huge harvest and efficiency made Yi Xian very excited. At the same time, he had a deeper understanding of the perverse ability of the slave seal. Under such circumstances, he was naturally more confident that he could use the same method to enslave the mosquito slayer. He even felt that if he had the opportunity to implant the slave seal into the body of the demon's leader, Naboshan, he might be able to directly enslave and subdue that guy. However, this was just a thought in his heart. Even if the slave seal he condensed now had the ability to do so, Yi Xian wouldn't make a move before he was sure. After all, if there was a failure, the consequences would be severe. It was simply unbearable. After all, the current situation was simply extremely good to him, and under such circumstances, there was utterly no need to rush forward rashly. After subduing the 99 demon slaves, Yi Xian immediately ordered them to head to the central plaza of the second level where Barker was and spread out in groups of 2s and 3s. Of course, they could also hide in the main passageways around the plaza. After all, there were usually not many demon dwellers in the plaza. If 100 demon dwellers suddenly appeared there, the mosquito butcher would be suspicious and it would backfire. Apart from that, Yi Xian also passed down the detailed plan to deal with the mosquito butcher. Basically, when the mosquito butcher arrived, the nearby demonic slaves would have to think of a way to create conflict and then escalate the situation. This would give the surrounding demonic slaves a legitimate reason to approach. In the end, everyone would be enraged and attack together, dragging the situation into a state of chaos as much as possible. Although the number of demonic slaves had now reached a full 100, Yi Xian only needed to communicate with them using his mental power when transmitting these orders. It was similar to mass messaging, so it was not very strenuous or time-consuming. Otherwise, if the number of demonic slaves increased in the future, and they did not gather together, just transmitting orders would cause Yi Xian a lot of trouble. After giving out all the instructions, the 99 newly subdued demonic slaves left one after another. Yi Xian randomly found a demon dweller's cave residence in one of the third-level passageways. After entering, he chose a single room and began to condense the slave seals. Time passed slowly. Unknowingly, another 2 days had passed. In these 2 days, Yi Xian had condensed more than 300 slave seals. The efficiency had already surpassed the previous time when he condensed a large number of them. This was naturally because he was gradually becoming more familiar with the process. Among these 300 slave seals, Yi Xian had specially condensed 2 strengthened versions. In other words, he now had a total of 3 strengthened versions of the slave seals in his hands. One of them was prepared to be used directly on the mosquito butcher after he arrived. As for the other 2, Yi Xian had only prepared them in advance. These 2 slave seals would be strengthened a third or even a fourth time after he successfully subdued the mosquito butcher. In short, the more strengthened the better. This was because Yi Xian planned to use them to deal with the demon dweller's leader, Naboshan. The other party was a supreme existence in the black hole realm, so Yi Xian had to give it his all. In front of an official opponent, the slave seals used to deal with him would never be the best, only better. At this moment, he had only condensed for 2 days before opening his eyes and temporarily ending this time's full power condensation. This was because Yi Xian had just received a simple signal from Barker's mental power right before he opened his eyes. In other words, the mosquito butcher had finally arrived. Yi Xian's eyes flashed. He took a deep breath and adjusted his aura. After confirming that there was no obvious murderous intent leaking out, he got up and left the cave dwelling. He quickly rushed to the central square of the second level. At the same time, in the central square of the second level of the demon dweller's cave dwelling area, In the middle of the 3 spatial portals standing in the middle of the square, the pillar and beam suddenly glowed, and then converged into a layer of black light film inside the spatial portal. Seeing this, Barker immediately sent a signal. Although he had not seen the person, he knew that it was the mosquito butcher who had arrived. On one hand, it was because the time was close. This guy would usually arrive in 1 or 2 days. On the other hand, it was because except for him, the elites of the demon dwellers on the upper 2 levels would not come here. At this moment, there were about 20 to 30 demon dwellers scattered in the huge central square. Some were walking toward the first-level main passageways, and some were walking in the opposite direction. They were walking toward the central area of the square where the 3 space portals were located. All of this was normal, so when Mosquito Butcher stepped out of the space door, he glanced around proudly and didn't find anything unusual. This person was quite tall and thin. He looked about 30 years old. He had a mustache and triangular eyes. There was a strong wretched aura all over his body. As he stepped forward, the black light film in the space portal behind him had disappeared in a flash in just a short breath. As for Mosquito Butcher, after looking around, he put his hands behind his back and walked unsteadily toward the entrance of the level 1 main tunnel in front of him. His only purpose for coming to the slums on the 2nd floor was to show off. After all, serving the black mosquito beast was not a very comfortable thing. He had to find a way to vent the pressure and depression that had accumulated in his heart, or at least to resolve it. Chapter 2664. Enough ants could kill an elephant in the 2nd layer of the demon dweller's slums. There had never been a demon dweller scout who dared to be disrespectful to him. Basically, after seeing him from afar, whether they were willing or not, they would take the initiative to greet him with a smile. To Mosquito Butcher, this was a kind of enjoyment, and this kind of enjoyment could slowly dissolve the pressure and depression that had accumulated in his heart, causing it to dissipate and dissipate. It had to be said that this guy's survival instinct was actually very strong. He was doing such a disgusting thing, but he still lived well. He could even think of a way to relieve pressure and adjust his state of mind and state. He was indeed a genius. But from another point of view, this person was too sad. In order to survive, he had already lost everything else. Stop! You 2 damn lowly commoners, I'm talking about you. As such a situation had never happened before, Mosquito Butcher was immediately stunned. By the time he regained his senses, the 2 demons had already passed by him and were walking behind him. There was even a faint snicker coming from behind him. Mosquito Butcher immediately flew into a rage and turned around to scold them. It was this scolding that made the 2 demon dwellers stop in their tracks. The other demon dwellers around the square were also alarmed by this scolding, and they all turned to look at Mosquito Butcher. Under such circumstances, he had to show off his prestige even more. Otherwise, once this matter spread out, he was afraid that all the devil dwellers in the 2nd layer of the slums would follow suit in the future. Gradually, all the devil dwellers would no longer listen to him. If that really happened, not only would the accumulated pressure and resentment in his heart not be able to be dispelled, it would even make things worse because of this matter. For Mosquito Butcher at that time, he would not be far from death or a complete mental breakdown. Therefore, in his eyes, this matter was not a small matter that could be casually brushed aside. This was a matter of life and death, so he had to take it seriously. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, the Mosquito Butcher's triangular eyes instantly burst out with a fierce light. Since these 2 lowly people in front of him did not know how to appreciate his kindness, then it was just right to use them as an example to fiercely establish his authority in this 2nd floor of the demon slum area. You're the ones who asked for it. No wonder you, Lord Mosquito Butcher, are so vicious. With a cold glint in his eyes, Mosquito Butcher gritted his teeth and said this. Then his figure flashed and he raised his hand to smash the 2 demon slaves in front of him. The gap between their realms was too great. With a gap of more than 2 major realms, this was a complete suppression. Kacha! Kacha! 2 crisp sounds of bones cracking could be heard. The 2 demon slaves didn't even have the chance to react before their chests completely caved in. Blood spurted out of their mouths as their bodies flew backwards like a kite with its string cut. Before he could even land, he had already died. This scene caused a large number of exclamations and gasps of cold air to erupt from the surroundings. The Mosquito Butcher was very satisfied with all this. It was good that they knew to be afraid. If they knew to be afraid, they would be more respectful in the future. That would make me feel even better. With this thought in mind, when he retreated after one strike and once again put his hands behind his back, he turned his head proudly to look at the other demons around him. The smile on his face suddenly froze again. In his line of sight, the expressions on the faces of the 20 or 30 demon slaves around him seemed to be a little out of his expectations. Although they were also shocked, there was no fear. Instead, they were all angry, extremely angry, giving people a feeling that they were about to explode. The mosquito butcher was stunned, and then a light flashed in his mind. He suddenly understood what was going on. Compared to him, could it be that the demon slaves on the second floor didn't feel the pressure? Didn't they have accumulated resentment in their hearts? As the lowest level of the Black Mosquito Bastion, they excavated mineral resources day and night outside, even risking their lives. Only once they completed a certain amount of tasks could they return once, holed up in the slums of the second floor for a few days to adjust and recuperate. But when the time was up, they immediately had to leave again. This cycle repeated year after year. The mosquito butcher could at least vent his presence in front of this group of demon slaves to resolve the accumulated resentment and pressure in his heart. But what about them? Not only did they have no way to vent, but they also had to brew more resentment because of the mosquito butcher's bullying. In this way, if he really wanted to compare, these guys were clearly worse than him. And now, because of what had just happened, the demons around him were obviously all enraged. The resentment and pressure that had been accumulating in their hearts for a long time were on the verge of exploding. These guys were going crazy. Thinking of this, the mosquito butcher's face changed in an instant. He was powerful, and the demons around him were just ants in his eyes. But with his status, killing 2 or 3 of them was not a big deal. If he killed too many, more than 10, Mount Nibel would definitely not let him go. Since he couldn't kill them and these guys were crazy, wouldn't that mean he could only be beaten up? These guys were weak, but the key was that there were so many of them. Once they went crazy, each of them could swallow him alive in one bite. You don't mess around. I'm telling you, I'll go crazy. Seeing that the demons around him were all gathering here with ferocious expressions, and even some demons were rushing over from the 4 entrances of the first-level main passageways around the square, the mosquito butcher was completely scared. He stuttered a warning and wanted to retreat from the path he came from. He was clearly planning to escape through the space door. Kill him, kill this bastard. I've had enough, I'm going to fight it out with him. After realizing the mosquito butcher's intention, the dozen demon slaves closest to him immediately roared and rushed over without fear of death, directly cutting off the mosquito butcher's path of retreat. This scene was like a fuse that was lit, and in an instant, the other demon slaves further away in the square also erupted. All the figures that could be seen were running wildly, murderous and converging. By the time Yixuan arrived, the scene was already in complete chaos. About 7 or 8 demon slaves' corpses were lying on the ground, and the mosquito butcher was still besieged by a large number of agitated demons. There were more than 100 of them, and they had already surpassed the number of Yixuan's demon slaves. Obviously, some of the demon slave scouts that had not been subdued by him were affected and took the initiative to join in because of their emotions. This scene surprised even Yixuan. The expression on his face gradually became strange, and he suddenly had a feeling of not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Don't come over, you bunch of lunatics, don't come over. Chapter 2665. Demon Bloodstar Essence Sword Tonic. Whoosh. 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 The sound of something tearing through the air could be heard. At least 100 invisible blades formed by the demon slayer's mental strength shot towards the mosquito slayer from different directions. These invisible blades formed by mental strength were only the attacks of low-level demon slayer. To the mosquito slayer, who had reached the 3rd major realm, the satellite realm, he did not care at all. With the strength of his body, even if he was hit, it would only hurt a little. Therefore, in the face of these invisible blades, the mosquito slayer did not care at all. He had already planned to take them head-on. The key was that the few demon slayers who had rushed to the front and sides of him were all grimacing. Their cold teeth made him feel extremely disgusted. In order to prevent these lunatics from biting him, the mosquito slayer's attention was all on them. Sometimes he dodged, sometimes he retracted his strength, raised his hand and sent one flying. During this process, he would occasionally feel a slight pain on his body. The pain was caused by the invisible blades that shot towards him. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the invisible wind blades had landed on his body. At this moment Yi Xian, who was mixed in with the demon slayers, suddenly felt his heart skip a beat. This was because the invisible wind blade that he shot out with the slave seal was already in front of the mosquito slayer and would hit his body soon. However, it was also very likely that the other party would dodge it. The difference between the gains and losses was too great, and he could not remain calm. Whoosh! Fortunately, the mosquito slayer ignored it in the end and treated this invisible wind blade as the same as the previous ones. As the faint sound of something tearing through the air disappeared, the invisible wind blade hit the side of the mosquito slayer's neck and the slave seal wrapped within it and instantly drilled in. Ouch! As a sharp pain suddenly came from his neck, the mosquito slayer, who was busy dodging the bites of the demon slayers, reflexively let out a soft cry and raised his hand to touch the side of his neck. Previously, the invisible wind blades could not even break through the skin of his body. After being hit, it would not even turn red. However, at this moment, he clearly felt as if something had drilled through his exposed neck. This was definitely not normal. As Mosquito Butcher raised his hand to stroke the side of his neck, a hint of vigilance appeared in his eyes. Unfortunately, this vigilance was quickly replaced by an increasingly intense feeling of bewilderment and sluggishness. It was obvious that the slave imprint had rapidly invaded the mind source core in his brain, and was currently enslaving it. At this moment, the Mosquito Butcher's hand stopped moving. He allowed the demons to bite him without any reaction. He just stood there in a daze like a robot that suddenly ran out of battery. "Alright, stop." Yi Xian was completely relieved. He stopped and shouted coldly. Following his shout, nearly 80% of the demon soldiers that were madly attacking the mosquito slayers suddenly stopped at the same time. The frenzy from before disappeared in the blink of an eye, and they became cold and indifferent. This scene was far too strange. Even the other 20% of the devil people, who were in a berserk state at this moment, were greatly shocked by this strange scene. Their hearts shook violently, and their originally berserk state of mind actually regained its clarity. Almost subconsciously, these 20 or so demons looked at Yi Xian at the same time. Their faces were filled with shock, and their eyes were filled with suspicion. Then they all started to shout at Yi Xian. "You! Something's wrong, something's wrong. This seems to be a trap. Who exactly are you? Alright, you guys go to the first level main passageways around the plaza and wait. Don't let the other demons come over. I need some time here." Yi Xian did not pay attention to the demons that were shouting at him. Instead, he calmly gave another order. In an instant, more than 90 demon slaves were divided into 5 groups. 4 groups rushed to the first-level main passageways around the central plaza, while the other group rushed to the 3 spatial doors in the center of the plaza. After all, from time to time, there would be some demons that would suddenly enter through the spatial door from the outside. Originally, it had nothing to do with you guys. Since you have nothing better to do than to join in the fun, then I'll just take you guys in advance. Just as all the demon slaves were about to leave, Yi Xian's gaze swept across the 20 or so demons that had shouted at him. As he spoke, he raised his hand and a series of slave seals shot out. Swish! Swish! Oh! The faint sound of something tearing through the air continued to ring out. Before these fellows could react, they had all struck their bodies and entered them. Compared to the Mosquito Butcher, who had a strong cultivation base of the satellite realm, this group of fellows clearly reacted faster. They immediately fell into a daze and stood there motionless. "Greetings, my lord." It was also at this moment that Mosquito Butcher, who was more than 10 meters to the right, suddenly spoke respectfully. He humbly bowed towards Yi Xian. It was unknown if it was because he was controlled by the slave seal, but this fellow didn't even have the dense wretched aura from before. He revealed an unprecedented calmness. "That's strange, when you're not being wretched, you're even more annoying. I simply want to slap your face." Looking at the serious Mosquito Butcher, Yi Xian frowned, then continued. "Forget it, you should be as wretched as before. Otherwise, it's hard to be sure that I won't suddenly act impulsively and directly slap you to death on the spot." With that, Yi Xian waved his hand and took out the Devil Bloodstar Essence Sword. It turned into a blood-red light and shot towards the 7 or 8 corpses of the demon cultivator scouts not far away. Several muffled sounds rang out, and the heads of the 7 or 8 demon cultivator scouts were instantly cut open, revealing the red and white objects and a small black monster core inside. What was even stranger was that as their heads were cut open, the corpses of the 7 or 8 demon cultivator scouts withered at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, they turned into withered corpses. On the other hand, after doing all of this, it turned into a ray of light and circled around before shooting back. In the blink of an eye, the demonic Bloodstar essence sword that entered Yi Xian's body was a little brighter than when it was shot out earlier. It was as if the essence of the flesh and blood in the corpses of the demon cultivator scouts had all been absorbed by it in an instant, turning into flesh and blood that aided the growth of the blood demon star essence sword. Towards all of this, Yi Xian was not surprised, because he had already tried it before and had already discovered it. It was also because of this that when he killed the demon cultivator and obtained the brain cores, he almost always used this devil Bloodstar essence sword. Since the demon cultivator's flesh and blood could be used as its food, then it obviously could not be wasted. Chapter 2666. A false alarm. Yi Xian was indeed disgusted by people like Mosquito Butcher. He always had the urge to kill him. If not for the fact that he was not confident that he could kill this guy, Yi Xian would not have planted a slave imprint on him. This kind of trash did not even have the qualifications to be his slave. But now, out of helplessness, he had already taken him in as a slave. Although Yi Xian was unwilling, he could only reluctantly accept this fact. Of course, he could also kill Mosquito Butcher now, but that would obviously do more harm than good. After all, even if he could obtain the key imprint to activate the spatial door in the middle from the demon core in Mosquito Butcher's brain, as well as the key imprint to enter the 3rd level of the demon nest. However, if Yi Xian didn't have the Mosquito Butcher by his side and entered the 3rd floor by himself, it was extremely likely that something unexpected would happen. After all, in the 3rd and 4th levels above, all the demon dwellers added together numbered no more than 1,000. With such a small population density, most of the demon dwellers in the same area would know each other. Under such circumstances, it was almost impossible for Yi Xian not to arouse suspicion when an unfamiliar face suddenly appeared. So, after some consideration, Yi Xian decided to temporarily let this guy live for a while. When he was no longer useful in the future, he would kill him. Alright, let's talk about the Black Mosquito Demon Beast. Suppressing the disgust in his heart, Yi Xian coldly glanced at Mosquito Butcher, who had recovered his wretched aura, but at least seemed to be quite obedient. Yes, my lord. Seeing that Yi Xian had finally turned his attention to him, Mosquito Butcher grinned wretchedly. He immediately ran over with his arms around his neck and bent his waist. He stood about 10 feet away from Yi Xian, and then stood respectfully with both hands. Suddenly, an expression of grief and indignation appeared on his face. It was so fast that it was as if he was changing his face. Even his words revealed an extremely obvious whimper. My lord, I'm so pitiful. Not only is that female mosquito extremely smelly, she's also very interested in that matter. She's extremely passionate and is simply addicted to it. What's more, it likes to be on top. Instead, I'm like a woman. It's so sad. The most important thing is that the beast is sick. It likes to stab me with its sharp mouth part while doing it. The more I screamed, the happier it laughed. I was tortured to death every time. Basically, when I came out of the devil's nest, my throat was hoarse. Woo! I don't want to live anymore. Oh! As he spoke, he actually began to cry, wiping his tears pitifully. All of this happened too quickly, in less than a minute. But in this short period of time, Yi Xian was completely stunned. At this moment, his mouth was slightly open, and his eyes were fixed on Mosquito Butcher, who was wiping his tears. His entire mind was rumbling like thunder, and even the white hairs on his back were instantly covered in sweat. A huge sense of crisis made Yi Xian's heart tremble. Acting. This guy is definitely acting. He's not controlled by the slave seal at all. Otherwise, why is he acting so strangely when the other demons are normal? He was clearly asked to explain the situation of the black mosquito beast, but this guy was actually talking about the disgusting matter between him and the female mosquito. He's definitely doing it on purpose. He actually gave Yi Xian a feeling that he was more wretched, more cunning, and more neurotic than before. He was clearly going with the flow, taking advantage of this opportunity to make a fool of him before making his move. What's wrong, my lord? Did you say it too quickly? Do you want more details? Just as Yixian's heart was rumbling, and his entire body was trembling with fear, Mosquito Butcher, who was wiping his tears, turned to look at Yixian. Seeing Yixian's abnormal expression, he was stunned for a moment before asking. Then he automatically took Yixian's silence as a tacit agreement. He sighed faintly, and a pitiful and indignant expression appeared on his face again. Sigh, all right. Although the past is really unbearable to look back on, but since my lord likes to hear the details, I'll sacrifice again. Cough, cough, cough. Speaking of that female mosquito, it's indeed not the usual kind of coquettish. This time, I'm not referring to the stench on its body, but the coquettishness. The first time, she didn't have the bad habit of killing people with her mouth weapon while playing, so at that time, I really enjoyed it. Shut up. Even though his mind was rumbling and his entire body was enveloped by a huge sense of danger, at this moment, Yixian couldn't take it anymore. He steeled his heart and suddenly roared. Plop! What surprised him was that as he roared, Mosquito Butcher, who was talking with a smile on his face, was so scared that his entire body trembled. His knees went soft and he knelt down on the spot. He even stuttered. His face was pale and his body trembled uncontrollably. My lord, please calm down. Did I say something wrong? Yixian was stunned again. Could it be that he wasn't pretending? Otherwise, wasn't he too good at pretending? He didn't even hesitate to kneel down in front of him. Was he addicted to pretending? Just as this thought surfaced in his mind, it was immediately rejected by Yixian. This fellow belonged to the type of person who was proud of his achievements and looked at Yanxing seductively. He definitely wouldn't torture himself for fun. The two were exactly the opposite. That means, I'm thinking too much? This guy was indeed controlled by the slave seal. Was the strangeness just now just a probability difference between individuals? Although this speculation was a little far-fetched, it seemed that there was no more reasonable explanation. Yixian gradually calmed down. At this moment he understood that it was just a false alarm. Scram, you can hide wherever you want, but you can't leave the second floor without permission. After such a fuss, Yixian didn't have the mood to continue listening to this guy's detailed description of the various situations of the black mosquito demonic beast. Just looking at his face made him angry, so after coldly reprimanding him, he immediately waved his hand in disgust. No matter what the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. Later on, he would summon him for more details. Very quickly, the Mosquito Butcher jogged towards the first-level main passage on the north side of the plaza. After the Mosquito Butcher's figure disappeared, Yixian calmed himself down before walking away. At the same time, through the connection with the slave seal, he used his mental power to issue a new order. He ordered all the demon slaves to spread out and hide in the caves of the demons. At the same time, he secretly paid attention to see if there was any special information. After a short while, Yixian chose a cave in the third-level passage. After entering, he found a single room and began to condense the slave seal. Chapter 2667. The master of the second floor. This time, Yixian went into seclusion for an entire 4 days. Only when the number of slave seals in his possession had reached more than 1,400, including the previous 300 or so, did Yixian let out a sigh of relief. He ended the refinement and opened his eyes. Among these 1,400 plus slave seals, there were a total of 52 of them that were enhanced versions of the elemental attribute. The so-called strengthened version was, in fact, a slave seal that had been repeatedly refined and nurtured with the power of the spirit origin. These enhanced versions of the slave seals had been refined with more psychic power and could last longer. They were more condensed, their runes more stable, their density higher, and they contained more psychic power. Therefore, the effect was also better. 50 of the 52 enhanced versions were the same as the ones on Mosquito Butcher. They had only been refined twice. The other 2 had been refined a total of 4 times. Yixian would continue to refine and temper these 2 seals until they were ready to attack Mount Naibua. As for the 50 strengthened slave seals that had only been condensed twice, Yixian would be using them soon. These were prepared for the elites of the Devil Cultivator on the 3rd floor. Of course, there were more than 50 of them on the 3rd floor. However, Yixian wasn't prepared to take all of them as demon slaves. If he could kill a portion of them, He would kill them and cut open their brains to retrieve their cores. After all, his own spiritual energy cultivation couldn't stop, and there was still the final boss to deal with. Yi Xian had to improve his cultivation in terms of the devil cultivator's spiritual energy, but these were all for later. What was important now was to gain full control of the entire second floor. Once that was done, half of the Black Mosquito Bastion would be under Yi Xian's control. Even if it was the weaker half, it was still a measure of confidence. What's more, Yi Xian couldn't rest assured that he would continue to nibble away at the lower levels until he had complete control of the lower levels. If he wanted to rush forward, at least the rear had to be stable and peaceful. Then he wouldn't have to worry about the rear. When he thought about how the entire second level of the Demon Cultivator Cave would soon fall into his control, Yi Xian immediately felt incomparably excited when he thought about how the entire second level of the Demon Cultivator Cave would soon fall into his control. At that time, he would become the supreme ruler of this place, just like when he was in the first level of the Myriad Heaven prison. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the room where he'd been in seclusion for the past 4 days. He headed straight for the other 2 rooms in the same room. From now on, he decided not to choose his targets. Instead, he would slowly spread out his hunting circle. In short, wherever he went, he would attack the demon dwellers as soon as he saw them. The 2 demon scouts who were in the same cave as him were not weak either. They were both at the 5th level of the core realm. But even so, they still didn't have the chance to resist Yi Xian, who was at the 8th level of the Star Core realm. In less than a minute, the 2 Demon Cultivator Scouts had become Yi Xian's new demon slaves. When all was done, Yi Xian walked out of the room and headed straight for the room on the other side of the passage. This time Yi Xian walked out of the cave 2 minutes later. Behind him, there were 4 demon slaves following him. "Alright, go about your business. I'll summon you when I need you." Waving his hand, Yi Xian didn't even look at the 6 new demon slaves that were respectfully standing at the entrance of the 2 caves. He walked towards the 2 caves that were closest to him on the same passageway. Time passed slowly. Just like that, Yi Xian didn't stop for even a moment. He walked out of one room and immediately went to the next. After an entire day and a half, he had practically walked through all the caves in the second level of the Demon Dweller's Cave. When he only had 66 of the 1,400 slave seals left, Yi Xian suddenly realized that he'd been walking around for nearly 2 hours, but he still hadn't found his next target. Could it be that it's really gone? With a strange expression on his face, Yi Xian muttered a few words. Then he activated the Spirit Source Core in his Sea of Consciousness. Like a mass text message, he sent the latest order to all the slaves within his sensing range. The demons in the 4 level 1 main passages at the edge of the central square all converged toward the central square. Under the leadership of Barker, they guarded the 3 space portals. Any demon scouts that entered were immediately subdued. The rest of the slaves in the other areas spread out and formed small teams to search for the fish in the net. Following Yi Xian's orders, more than half of the 1,400 slaves in the second layer immediately began to move. The other half, who were a little further away and weren't within the range of Yi Xian's sensing range, also received the news and moved out. In an instant, the entire second layer of the Demon Cave area was in a complete uproar. With so many slaves searching with all their might, it took less than half an hour for them to search every nook and cranny of the second layer. Needless to say, they really did find a dozen or so fish that had slipped through the net. These dozen or so fellows keenly noticed the abnormality, so they hid themselves without batting an eyelid. However, after being found out, they were still unable to escape the fate of being subdued by Yi Xian's slave seal and becoming a demon slave. In addition, during this time, there were also many demon scouts who had entered the second layer through the portals outside the Black Mosquito Bastion. Nearly 40 of them. This portion was also planted with slave seals by Yi Xian, who had rushed to the central plaza. At last Yi Xian completely cleared out the second layer. The number of slaves he had reached 1,567. In other words, nearly a sixth of the Black Mosquito Bastion's 10,000 members were now under Yi Xian's control without anyone noticing. Counting the 1,000 he'd killed before, the total number of reliable demons in the Black Mosquito Bastion's hands was less than 7,000. Of these 7,000, there were nearly 1,000 elites in the first 2 layers. The remaining 6,000 were ordinary scouts, all of whom were now carrying out missions outside the bastion. They were bound to return one by one to fall into the hands of Yi Xian. So long as nothing unexpected happened, in the end they would be nibbled away at little by Yi Xian. Now that the entire second layer was thoroughly cleaned out, Yi Xian immediately issued a summons to all the slaves through his psychic powers. He ordered them to gather at the central plaza within half an hour. In less than 20 minutes, all 1,567 slaves were assembled in the plaza. Among them was the wretched mosquito slayer from the third layer above. From now on, you will only serve me and obey my rules. Chapter 2668. Gui Hai Dao. As Yi Xian's words spread, the bodies of more than 1,000 demon slaves in the central plaza trembled. When Yi Xian had spoken, he had activated the spirit source core in his sea of consciousness and intimidated all the demon slaves except Buck. However, he hadn't realized that among all the demon slaves in the plaza, besides Buck, who was standing at the front of the formation, the wretched mosquito slayer, who had shrunk his neck and blended in with the demon slaves, clearly didn't show such a reaction. His body suddenly trembled, and his expression turned cold. Fear appeared in his eyes. Mosquito Slayer's eyes kept darting around until he realized that all the demon slaves had the same reaction. Then he pretended to shake his shoulders, shaking off the wretched aura on the ground. After Yi Xian finished speaking, he directly handed everything over to Buck. The reason why he appointed Barker as the head of all the demonic slaves and was above everyone else wasn't just because Barker was the first demonic slave he'd subdued, but also because Yi Xian had promised him at that time. That's right, Buck's cultivation base was very low. He was only at the second level of the core realm. However, among the more than 1,000 demon slaves that Yi Xian had subdued, the highest cultivation base was at the 7th level of the core realm, which was only one level lower than his own. In fact, there were more than 400 mid-level core realm demon slaves at the 4th level and above. Even so, Yi Xian still believed that Barker was the most suitable candidate to be the demon slave general manager amongst the 1,500 over demon slaves. On one hand, it was because Buck was extremely steady and meticulous. Yi Xian had observed all the demon slaves and found that no one was more outstanding than Buck in these two aspects at the same time. In addition, the most important thing was that Yi Xian had always had an inexplicable intuition. This intuition was very profound and couldn't be explained clearly. However, he always felt that Barker would be extremely important to him in the near future, the kind that he couldn't do without. Part of the reason Yi Xian supported Barker was because he followed this kind of intuition. In fact, Buck's performance didn't disappoint him. Although his cultivation base was only at the 2nd level of the core realm, Buck didn't feel the slightest bit of stage fright in front of this huge formation of more than 1,500 demon slaves. His expression was solemn and his voice was low but firm. His words were clear and organized. He actually quickly announced the hierarchy of the demon slaves on the spot. From then on, the demon slaves would be divided into small groups of 10, with a decurion. 100 would be divided into a medium group, with a centurion leading 10 small groups. 1,000 would be a large group, with a chiliarch leading 10 medium groups. Right now, there were only around 1,500 demonic slaves, so there was only 1,000-man battalion. The chiliarch was the only 7th-ranked demonic slave, someone called Gui Hai Dao. As for the 10 centurions in the 1,000-man brigade, Barker gave Gui Hai Dao the authority to choose and appoint them. Of the remaining 500 or so demon slaves, only 6 centurions would be appointed for the time being. Once there were 1,000 demon slaves in the future, the chiliarch would be chosen. With just a few simple words, the entire management structure of the demon slaves was clearly laid out. In the future, each level would be in charge of the next. The aura and appearance of the entire demon slaves would be renewed very soon. All of this caused Yi Xian, who was standing to the side, to secretly nod his head. He deeply felt that the decision to choose Barker as the head of the demon race was too wise. After the entire management structure was laid out, Buck announced on the spot that there would be an hour for Gui Hai Dao and the other 6 centurions to choose their direct subordinates. Then, the selected demon slaves would be chosen one level at a time. Finally, the decurions would choose 10 demon slaves to be in their own small groups. With a single order, the entire central plaza instantly became lively, but it was still orderly. In just 50 minutes, the plaza was once again quiet. All of the demon slaves had already lined up according to the new arrangement. On the left was a complete battalion of 1,000. Gui Haidao stood at the very front. Although the square formation behind him was a hole, it could be vaguely seen that there were 10 large blocks. Each large block could be divided into 10 smaller blocks. On the right, there were only 6 centurions forming a large block. One of them was even incomplete, with less than 100 people. My lord, I seem to have been left behind. Just as Yixian was examining the newly organized group of devil cultivators and feeling extremely satisfied, a wretched and somewhat lacking in confidence voice suddenly appeared. All the demon slaves looked towards the source of the voice, and a strange expression appeared on their faces. Everyone, including Yixian and Buck, reacted the same way. The one who spoke was the wretched mosquito butcher. At this moment, he was standing alone in the empty space between the 2 square formations. His head was lowered, and his face was full of grievance and resentment. His mustache was trembling, and it was obvious that he was very angry. There was no doubt that no one wanted this guy at all. Even the Decurion, who only had 3 demon slaves because there was no one else to choose from, didn't want him. Yixian was stunned for a few seconds. Then his face turned slightly green, and his head started to throb. This guy was like a bag of poisonous pus. If he cut him, he would be afraid of pain. If he didn't cut him, he would become more and more annoyed. As a powerful demon slave in the satellite realm, he was the only one who could be like this. Whether it was Yixian or Barker, they both ignored the wretched mosquito butcher's protests and complaints. The former lightly coughed twice, then turned his head to look at the distant passageway, as if he was admiring the scenery. As for the latter, he borrowed the opportunity to assign a mission and directly skipped over this matter. According to Buck's order, from now on, 2 centurions would be stationed in the central square, and they would rotate every day and night. The mission was very simple. Capture all the demon slaves who returned from the outer space of the Graveyard Star Field through the space door as soon as possible. Capture all the demon slaves, and send them to me when there are 100 of them. We will first fill up the 2,000-men squadrons. After that. Yixian nodded and interrupted at the right time. He looked at Buck and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. Then he continued. After that, kill those who return on the spot and cut out their demon cores. If there are 100 of them, send them to me. After that, Yixian turned around and walked to the first level passage on the left side of the square. He still had to condense more than 400 ordinary slave seals. After that, he should be able to slowly collect a large number of demon cores. Then, he would start to cultivate in seclusion and increase the level of his spiritual power. All of this was just preparation for entering the 3rd level soon. Chapter 2669. Condense and disintegrate. After successfully gaining control of the Black Mosquito Bastion's 2nd level, Yixian considered returning to the 1st level of Cataclysm and bringing the green-bearded Lu Wenxuan out to fulfill his promise. However, after thinking about it for a while, he finally gave up on this idea. The entire 2nd level of the bastion was safe, and Lu Wenxuan could leave at any time through the portal that connected to the void of the universe. However, this action would most likely be detected by the Black Mosquito Bastion's AI. After all, Lu Wenxuan wasn't a demon. At least he didn't have the psychic energy of a demon scout. Therefore, when he crossed the black membrane beneath the portal, the chances of him being detected by the Black Mosquito Bastion's AI was high. Although he was still able to calmly leave, the spatial door was only a passageway and didn't have the ability to seal those who passed through it. However, in this way it would be tantamount to exposing Yixian. Everything he'd done before would be for naught. What's more, with Lu Wenxuan's temperament, if he found out about Yixian's plan, he'd most likely refuse to leave. Since that was the case, it was better to let him remain in the Cataclysm for a while longer. At least he wouldn't have to worry about his safety. After putting this matter aside, Yixian calmed his heart and began to focus on refining the slave seals. Of the 1,000 over slave seals from before, only 60 or so were left. As for the 2nd demon slave, he hadn't filled it up yet. There was a difference of several hundred people, so this was the first thing Yixian did. When the hundreds of ordinary slave seals were completed, Barker led his men to Yixian's abode, escorting the 100 demons they'd captured from the central plaza. Yixian only left after he'd placed a slave seal on each of the 100 demons. After repeating this several times, it only took less than 2 days for the gap to be filled. Yixian now had 2 fully staffed 1,000-man demon slave brigade under his command. Apart from Gui Hai Dao, the chilly arch of the 2nd Demonkin Brigade was also chosen. His name was Cong Qingyu, and he was a Demonkin powerhouse who was also at level 7 core state. He had just returned 2 days ago. If Gui Hai Dao had not been at the central square, it would have been difficult to capture him. Once the 2,000-strong demon slave brigades were full, Yixian told Barker not to disturb him if there was nothing important. Barker was to collect 100 demon cores from the demon slaves and deliver them to him. He was to place them directly on the small table in the abode. Then, he began to focus on condensing the strengthened version of the slave seal to deal with the demon dweller elites on the upper 2 floors. In less than 2 days, Yixian had refined hundreds of ordinary slave seals. In addition to the 52 that he had refined previously, he only had a total of 402 slave seals in his mind source core. Then he stopped refining new ordinary slave seals. Instead, he repeated the process of refining the 402 slave seals. Among them, the 2 individual pills were given special attention and were refined the most times. As for the other 400 pills, they were prepared for elites of the same cultivation level as Barker, so the number of times they were refined was much lower. Just like that, Yixian continued to refine the 402 strengthened version slave seals day and night. Occasionally, he would stop to collect the demon cores that Barker had delivered to him from the table in the abode's hall outside the small cubicle. He would throw them directly to the devouring system to break them down before continuing to refine them. Time passed in this monotonous and boring process of refining and breaking down the demon cores. Unknowingly, 10 days had passed in the blink of an eye. Sitting cross-legged on the small cubicle bed, Yixian opened his eyes and fell into deep thought. The strengthened version of the slave seal should be enough. Even the 400 seals that had been refined less frequently had already surpassed the one he had used to deal with the wretched mosquito slayer. As for the other 2 pellets that had been condensed for the longest time, the number of times they were condensed was several times more. Yixian decided to use the remaining time to improve his psychic power. This would be the last step of his preparations before he officially set out for the 3rd floor. After that, Yixian would immediately rush to the 3rd floor. He had a feeling that if he delayed any longer, the changes in the lower 2 floors of the Black Mosquito Bastion would soon be exposed. This was obvious. In the 10 days that he'd been using all his strength to condense the strengthened version of the demon slave, the head of the demon slaves, Barker, had sent over nearly 2,000 demon cores. All of them were immediately thrown to the devouring system to be decomposed by Yixian. At this moment, these demon cores had just been decomposed, and the large amount of mental energy absorbed from them were all stored in the devouring system. Yixian could withdraw them at any time. Each brain represented a demon dweller scout. If Yixian were to include the demon core that he'd consumed earlier, the total number of demon cores he'd obtained from the beginning to the end had actually reached a terrifying amount of nearly 4,000. The entire Black Mosquito Bastion had only 10,000 demon scouts. In a short period of time, Yixian had killed 4,000 and taken 2,000. If one were to exclude the thousands of elite demons on the upper 2 floors, there were at most 3,000 demons left outside. Of these 3,000 or so, 200 or 300 returned almost every day. One by one, they were captured by Yixian's demon slaves. They were killed on the spot, their brains cut open and their cores extracted. Once the 3,000 demons had been completely wiped out, there would be no more demons coming in or out of the Black Mosquito Bastion. Such an obvious anomaly would quickly attract the attention of Mount Naibua. If he was lured down because of this, then all would be lost. It wasn't that Yixian hadn't thought of letting the 2,000 demon slaves under his command continuously come in and out to create an illusion to confuse the monitoring power of the Black Mosquito Bastion. However, this method was obviously just a fool's dream and couldn't be realized at all. Because the psychic power of ordinary demon scouts was too weak, they couldn't activate the portal multiple times in a short period of time. Every time they activated it, they had to wait at least half a month before they could do it again. Under this kind of restriction, with the 2,000 demon slaves under Yixian's command, it was clearly far from enough to create an illusion that they were strong enough for a long time. 10 days. Within 10 days, he had to take down the 3rd and 4th floors above. Otherwise, once the 3,000 demon scouts outside were completely exhausted, The changes in the lower 2 floors of the Black Mosquito Bastion would be exposed. Thinking of this, Yi Xian, who was deep in thought and analysis, suddenly felt his heart skip a beat. In an instant he felt a sense of urgency that he had never felt before. Within 2 days, I have to absorb all the psychic power extracted from the demonic cores by the system. After the last breakthrough in psychic power, the ability to condense slave seals appeared. I wonder if there will be a similar surprise this time? Chapter 2670. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation entering the 3rd level. Ding. All monster cores have been decomposed. Spiritual origin energy feedback has begun. Progress 1. Progress 2. As Yi Xian took the initiative to contact the Devouring system and request to extract all of the spiritual origin energy obtained from decomposing the monster cores, the Devouring system's notification sounded in his mind almost immediately. Immediately after, an unimaginably vast and boundless spiritual force surged over like a torrential flood from the Milky Way, roaring as it surged into Yi Xian's sea of consciousness. This kind of spiritual origin energy was formless and intangible. It could not be touched or seen, but it was incomparably real. When such a massive amount of spiritual origin energy suddenly surged violently into his knowledge sea, Yi Xian instantly felt his spirit tremble violently, as if even his primordial spirit in consciousness had begun to tremble. This kind of pain was indescribable. His entire knowledge sea was being continuously impacted and compressed by this sudden surge of spiritual origin energy, forming a tempering effect that made his knowledge sea wider and more solid. At the same time, while his knowledge sea was being rapidly spread and surged by this spiritual origin energy, the purplish-black spiritual origin energy suspended in the center of his knowledge sea also began to slowly rotate. At every moment, strands of spiritual origin energy were being absorbed into it. This process was painful yet pleasurable. Yi Xian was already drenched in sweat, but he gritted his teeth and persevered. In the end, he felt numb, and his consciousness gradually became absent-minded. Only the obsession in his heart never faded. After an unknown amount of time, Yi Xian felt as if his entire body had turned into nothingness, and his consciousness was gradually drifting away. It was as if he was an eternally exiled cosmic dust in the void of the Milky Way, slowly but unceasingly drifting away, farther and farther away, becoming more and more unreal. Suddenly, an unfamiliar yet familiar voice abruptly rang out at this moment. Ding! Congratulations to the host. Spiritual origin energy absorption complete. The level of the source core has been raised. You have obtained the spiritual origin energy skill. Do you wish to activate it? Yi Xian's body suddenly shook, and his tightly shut eyes opened in an instant. After a short period of confusion, he almost instantly remembered everything, and his eyes could not help but flash with a hint of shock. Just a moment ago, his soul had almost fallen into a whirlpool of consciousness. If it wasn't for the prompt of the Devouring system, he would have fallen into an eternal slumber and never been able to wake up again. Now that he thought about it, he immediately broke out in a cold sweat and was scared. It seemed that he had underestimated the pain caused by the continuous washing and tempering of the sea of consciousness by a large amount of spirit quintessence. Even with his firm will, he was almost unable to endure it. After lamenting for a while, Yi Xian quickly adjusted his state of mind. Once he had calmed down, he issued a command to the Devouring system and activated the mind skill that had appeared after his mind source core had leveled up once again. Ding! Activation successful. Congratulations! You've obtained the support type spiritual skill, Perfect Shock. Absolute Shock. Ding! Activation successful. Congratulations! You've obtained the attack type spiritual skill, Annihilation Spear. Vortex of Destruction. There were actually 4 types of spiritual power skills, 2 support type and 2 attack type. As this thought flashed through his mind, Yi Xian was caught off guard and was stunned on the spot. Immediately after, his entire mind was suddenly filled with a huge sense of surprise. This kind of joy and excitement was simply indescribable. After a short while, when he had calmed down slightly, he began to study the 4 unexpectedly obtained spiritual power skills. First of all, there were the 2 support type spiritual skills, Perfect Shock and Absolute Shock. These two spiritual skills used an extremely complicated and unique method to form two completely different invisible shocks that envelop the entire body to achieve completely different effects. Perfect shock. Shock spiritual power forms a shield that envelopes the entire body. During the duration of the shock, everything within the shield, including sound, aura, and so on, will be perfectly isolated, as if it had completely disappeared and no longer existed. Absolute shock. Shock spiritual power also forms a shield, but its effect is completely different. During the duration of the shock, it forms a protective state that is close to absolute defense until the spirit quintessence is completely exhausted. Of course, the defensive shield formed by absolute shock would receive different levels of attacks, and the speed and extent of the spirit quintessence depletion would also be different. If the number of attacks exceeded the total amount of spirit quintessence, then the result would be no surprise, instant kill. As for the other two attack-type spiritual skills, Annihilation Spear and Vortex of Destruction, the former was easy to understand. In fact, it used a unique method to compress a large amount of spirit quintessence to the extreme, making it infinitely dense and transforming it into an invisible spiritual spear to attack. On the other hand, Vortex of Destruction was the exact opposite. It did not compress but expanded. To put it in a more abstract way, it was actually similar to nuclear fusion. However, this skill was very dangerous and was equivalent to self-destructing. Once it was used, all of the spirit quintessence would be instantly depleted, forming a destructive spiritual vortex. Therefore, it could only be used in a desperate situation. Upon understanding this, Yi Xian could not help but feel a chill run down his spine. The power of Vortex of Destruction was truly unexpected, leaving him speechless. Even so, Yangming did not let go of any of the four mental skills. He carefully deduced and tried to perform them a few times, and only stopped when he could release them as he wished and could use them at will. Of course, Yi Xian did not try to use the terrifyingly powerful Vortex of Destruction. He merely deduced it with his mind. When he was done, he suddenly remembered his sea of consciousness, which had just undergone an extremely intense tempering, and the spirit source core that was suspended within it. After inspecting it for a while, Yi Xian discovered that his sea of consciousness had indeed become wider and more solid. The spirit source core suspended in the middle of his sea of consciousness had become slightly bigger, and its purplish-black color had also become slightly brighter. The total amount of spirit quintessence contained within it was obviously more boundless as well. In short, Yi Xian's current strength in the Demon Dweller's spirit quintessence had increased by a large level compared to before. It was completely different from before. Immediately after, Yi Xian used his spirit quintessence to connect with the demon slave Chief Barker through the unseen perception of the slave seal. Only then did he find out that the original 2-day time limit had actually only passed by half. It was exactly 1 day and night. There are still 9 days left. The progress of advancing upwards is slightly more compact. It should be enough. As he muttered to himself, Yi Xian took a deep breath and stepped out of the cave abode where he was in seclusion. After a short while, he arrived at the central square. The wretched butcher that he had ordered Barker to summon was already waiting there. Chapter 2671. The wretched mosquito slayers bedding the Black Mosquito Bastion was divided into 4 levels of space. Due to the different functions of each level, the internal structure of each level was clearly different as well. For example, the bottommost level, the Cataclysm, was an enormous space that was dotted with numerous cages. The second level was used to house the 10,000 demon scouts of the Black Mosquito Bastion. It was a labyrinth of densely packed caverns. As for the upper 2 levels, they belonged to the wealthy of the Black Mosquito Bastion. Those who lived on these levels were all elites of the demon race. In other words, they were at least late-stage core star. Of course, not all demon cultivator scouts who had stepped into the 7th level of the star core realm would be able to enter the upper 2 levels. At the very least, the 2,000-man captains under Yi Xian's command were all at the 7th level of the star core realm. However, they were still hanging around in the 2nd level of the slums. Since it was a wealthy area, the upper 2 levels were obviously not the same as the lower 2 levels. All that was considered in terms of planning and arrangement was to make the best use of everything. It was important to note that the total number of demon elites living on the upper 2 levels was only a little more than 1,000. 1,000 demons occupied 2 whole levels of space. No matter how wasteful the construction of these 2 levels was, it was still more than enough. As for what the 4th level would be like, Yixian had no idea. However, the 3rd level in front of him was clearly luxurious and extravagant. It was clear that the structure of this floor did not consider practicality or making the best use of everything. Instead, it was a kind of comfort and enjoyment. This allowed the elites of the demon race to naturally develop an extremely strong sense of superiority in their lives. After stepping out of the black light membrane of the spatial door, Yixian immediately turned his head to look around and began to examine his surroundings. There were also 3 enormous portals behind him. Yixian and the wretched mosquito slayer had come out from the one on the left, while the one on the right led to the demon's pawn nest that occupied a large area on the 3rd level. This was where the black mosquito's cavern was located. As for the portal in the middle, it appeared to be of a higher level. Its pillars and beams were engraved with more complex runes. It was clearly the portal that led to the 4th level. Although the 3 portals were lined up in a row, they weren't like the 2nd level below. Instead, they were located in the center of a large plaza. Although it was also a plaza, it wasn't as large as the one on the 2nd level. Furthermore, there were areas in front, behind, to the left, and to the left. The square under his feet was more like an irregularly shaped, luxurious altar. 3 doors stood on the inner side, and behind them was a tall space curtain wall. Apart from the back, there was a passageway in front and on the left and right, respectively, leading to different areas. The largest section was directly in front of them. It was the Black Mosquito Bastion's engine room, including its kinetic systems, weapon systems, and defense systems. Everything that was related to the Bastion's normal operations was located in this area. Of course, the Bastion's AI system was in the hands of Captain Nabashan, who was in charge of the 1st level of control. Through the AI system, he could directly control the enormous engine room. Yixian wasn't prepared to immediately make a move in this area. On one hand, it was because the elites of the Devil Cultivator were all relatively powerful, and on the other hand, it was because these fellows all had different positions. Once they discovered that something was amiss, they would be able to immediately send a warning to the 1st floor through the control of their positions. In addition to this computer room area that occupied the largest space, there were also 2 independent areas on the left and right. However, relatively speaking, the space and area occupied was obviously much smaller. On the left side was the living area where the elites of the demonkin lived and cultivated. To the right was the storehouse. Aside from the resources the demonkin needed, there was also everything the 10,000 demonkin scouts on the Black Mosquito Bastion had gathered day and night in the domain of the fallen. For example, planetary cores, rare materials, treasures, and the like were all stored in the storehouse. Yixian was quite interested in these 2 areas. To him, the living area was obviously an even higher level hunting ground. Of course, even if there weren't too many demon cultivator experts staying inside due to the rotation, there would at most be around 200 of them. However, due to their cultivation bases not being weak, this hunt was definitely not an easy task for Yixian. As for the warehouse area on the right, there was no need to mention it. Just thinking about the massive amount of star cores and various treasures inside caused Yixian's heart to thump with excitement. However, neither the living quarters on the left nor the warehouse area on the right was where Yixian and the wretched mosquito slayer were headed. The first place they were going to was the Black Mosquito Demon Beast's nest. The Banshee's nest was indeed on this level, but it was an independent space created using spatial folding technology. It could only be entered through the portal on the right. Otherwise, even if they searched every nook and cranny of the 3rd level, they wouldn't be able to enter. At this moment, after the master and servant walked out of the spatial door on the left, the wretched mosquito butcher raised his foot and was about to walk forward. Yixian coldly snorted and immediately stopped him. Seeing that there was no one around, he brought up the matter of going to the demon's nest. The wretched mosquito slayer was obviously stunned when he heard this. Then he forced a bitter expression on his face and replied with a frown, "My lord, I'm not worried that you'll steal my job or go compete with that slut for your favor. The problem is that I really can't go now." When he heard that this guy actually had such thoughts, even thinking about how he was competing with him to serve that female mosquito, Yixian was caught off guard and almost fainted on the spot. Among all the demon slaves, this guy was the only one who was so weird. Sometimes, Yixian even wanted to strangle him to death on the spot. "My lord, you really don't believe me?" Seeing Yixian gnashing his teeth in anger, the wretched mosquito slayer spread his hands and continued pitifully. It's not like you don't know why I'm going there. That female mosquito has a huge appetite. It won't let go until it's done tormenting me. Under such circumstances, if I don't make any preparations and go there casually, I'll be tortured to death on the bed. 3 days. At this point, the wretched mosquito slayer raised his hand and gestured 3 fingers. He grinned and said, "Just give me 3 days to soak in the potion. I usually soak in it for 7 days before I dare to go to bed. I'll only give you half a day." Chapter 2672. A poisonous halo. Although he'd only managed to buy a pitiful half a day's time, the wretched mosquito slayer had no choice but to compromise in the face of Yixian's uncompromising tone. His head drooped, and his expression was that of someone who just lost his father. Sighing, he led the way to his abode. The wretched mosquito slayer's abode was also located in the elite Demunkin's residential area on the left. The entire residential area was like a large, luxurious villa district. The environment was elegant and filled with greenery. Not far away were individual villas with courtyards. These villas were the residences of the elite Demonkin. The wretched mosquito slayer's abode was one of them. The Black Mosquito Bastion only had about 1,000 Demonkin in total. Of these, there were about 200 on the first floor, and about 800 on the third floor below. Of these 800 Demonkin elites, 200 were permanently stationed in the warehouse area on the right. The remaining 400 were divided into 2 groups, and took turns to work in the engine room area. In other words, of the 400 or so villas in this residential area, only half of them were occupied at any given time. The 10,000 Demonkin below were squeezed into the same space on the first floor, living in large bunks. The elite Demonkin above, on the other hand, had left such luxurious villas empty for long periods of time. This was a huge difference, and even Yixian couldn't help but sigh. After entering the residential area, they hadn't gone far when the silhouettes of some of the Demonkin elites began to appear. The wretched mosquito slayer immediately puffed out his chest, put his hands behind his back, and began to walk with his chin slightly raised. In order to match him, Yixian deliberately bent his back in an awkward manner. He kept his head down and didn't look around. It was obvious that he was one of the wretched mosquito slayer's new followers. Otherwise, the sudden appearance of an unfamiliar face in this area, where there weren't many Demonkin to begin with, would obviously attract suspicious gazes. "I say, little Xian, I didn't lie to you, did I? The third floor is the real heaven. In the future, follow this old master and serve me well. Be diligent in your daily chores like serving tea, serving water, massaging shoulders and washing feet." As he walked forward, the wretched mosquito slayer pinched his sharp, duck-like voice and began to teach Yixian. The words "little Xianzi" came out of his mouth without any hesitation. It was so smooth that it couldn't be any smoother. Hearing this, Xianyi only felt that it was dark in front of him and almost fell down. Was this really his demon slave? At this moment, even Yixian himself had doubts about this. Since ancient times, he had never heard of someone who dared to make fun of his master's servants. However, this fellow was soon unable to be complacent, because as his figure appeared, the demon elites in this living area, one after another, after noticing this, their expressions changed abruptly. Then, as if they were avoiding a ghost, they all turned around and returned to their own villa cave residence. For a moment, the sound of the door closing could be heard incessantly. This scene was so strange that even Yixian was stunned. He suddenly understood why this fellow had to stroll down to the second floor every now and then. This was clearly the rhythm of a poisonous halo. Just by being seen from afar, such a large area was automatically cleared out in an instant. "You bunch of bastards, one day I, Master Mosquito Slayer, will bring out that smelly female mosquito and have you line up to serve her one by one." Seeing this familiar scene in front of him, the wretched mosquito slayer, who was usually a little angry at most, but usually would quickly return to his cave residence in a sullen mood, actually roared loudly. This scene fell into the eyes of Yixian, although he did not know what kind of reaction the wretched mosquito slayer would have when he encountered such a situation. But this fellow had been hanging around in the third floor of the demon elite living area for 3 whole years. Judging from the behavior of those demon elites just now, it was obvious that they usually had this kind of attitude when they saw this fellow. Since that was the case after 3 whole years, the wretched mosquito slayer should not have been so indifferent, right? No matter what, he should not have such a strong reaction. In addition, the content of the words that he had just blurted out in anger and embarrassment. Yixian frowned slightly as he pondered. In his mind he faintly felt that he was about to grasp an important key. Unfortunately, that trace of inspiration only appeared halfway before it sank back down and could not be found again. However, after this incident, Yixian subconsciously became more cautious of the wretched mosquito slayer. Of course, he would not show any of this. At this moment, seeing that all the demon elites had returned to their own cave mansions, the wretched mosquito slayer also felt bored. In addition, time was of the essence, so after grumbling angrily for a while, he took the lead and walked far away to the cave mansions on the western side of the border. This was within Yixian's expectations. For an existence like him who had a poisonous halo, it would be strange if he did not live in such a remote border area. Soon, the two of them entered the wretched mosquito slayer's cave mansions. As the door closed, this fellow's demeanor immediately took a 180-degree turn, and he returned in the blink of an eye. He nodded and bowed as he took the initiative to retreat behind Yixian. With a smile on his face, anyone could tell at a glance that this was a dog of a slave. "Did you have a good time just now? Little Xian, you've been muttering those words in your heart for a long time, haven't you? Otherwise, you wouldn't have been able to speak so smoothly. You just opened your mouth and said it?" As he casually walked around the mansions, Yixian quietly mocked and ridiculed him. At the same time, he secretly observed this fellow's reaction from the corner of his eye. The wretched mosquito slayer immediately began to explain in a panic. In any case, he already had a ready-made excuse. In order to cover up Yixian's identity, he opened his mouth and said it with sincerity. He looked like he would protect his master with his life, so Yixian really did not see anything wrong with him. However, the more he could not see the problem, the more it meant that there was definitely a problem. Otherwise, why was it that among the other 2,000 demon slaves, there was not even one who knew how to flatter and take the opportunity to offend someone like him? They were all subdued with the slave seal. Even if there were differences between them, this fellow was originally a weirdo, so the possibility of him mutating was not completely impossible. However, it should not be so exaggerated, right? As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Yixian could not help but recall the words that the wretched mosquito slayer had roared out in a moment of embarrassment and anger. Faintly, he suddenly felt that the glimmer of light that he had not grasped before seemed to be coming to him again. "I couldn't tell. You're dressed so wretched and sloppy, but your cave mansions are so neat and tidy." After saying that, Yixian casually glanced at the wretched mosquito butcher behind him and casually continued. To be able to keep their living quarters in such an orderly manner without a single speck of dust, they are usually people with meticulous minds and introverted personalities. This isn't like you, it's really impressive. My lord, don't praise me like that. It's just that I usually tidy up when I'm free. Chapter 2673. Assimilation of the slave seal. Before Yixian began to suspect the wretched mosquito slayer, he would immediately feel uncomfortable just thinking about this guy, let alone seeing him. He would have the urge to immediately call him over and strangle him to death on the spot. But now, after he began to suspect the wretched mosquito slayer, this strong feeling of disgust inexplicably disappeared. Perhaps this was because Yixian had more or less confirmed that this guy's extremely wretched appearance was actually just a disguise. This wasn't his true nature. Instead, he was very cautious and patient, and most likely did not lack some kind of firm belief or Tao heart. This could be seen from the fact that he had tidied up the huge space in this villa. Of course, even so, Yixian didn't dislike him that much. If he had a good impression of him, then no matter what, it was impossible. Yixian originally thought that this guy had to soak himself in the medicinal water before going to serve the black mosquito slayer was just an excuse. His purpose was to stay in this villa for a few more days to prepare some kind of method. But when he saw that this guy had actually placed a huge bathtub in the side room of the villa's first floor, and there was indeed a strong medicinal fragrance in the air, Yixian finally understood. Based on the smell, the medicinal herbs that emitted this smell should have some special effects that could stimulate the body's strength and make it stronger for a short period of time. From this, it could be seen that this guy was not fooling around. He really only wanted to come back and soak himself in the medicinal water for a few days. In other words, if this guy was indeed faking it, then this was not his plan. Moreover, if the premise that he was not subdued and controlled by the slave seal was true, then why would he, a powerful existence with a satellite realm cultivation base, have to compromise so much and even kneel down in front of a small core realm ant like himself? This was obviously a scheme. Although there were many things on Yixian that were worthy of his schemes, whether it was the Devouring system or the supergrade warship Purple Star shuttle, he had no idea. Then the only possibility left was the slave seal. Thinking of this, Yixian's eyes suddenly lit up. In an instant, he completely understood everything at this time. The wretched mosquito slayer had already entered the side room and was making a racket in the medicine barrel. Yixian, who was left alone in the living room, pondered for a while before finally sitting cross-legged on the sofa. He closed his eyes and began to refine the 402 slave seals in his hands. In just half a day it was clearly far from enough to refine all of these slave seals, even if it was just once. Yixian did not intend to do that. What he wanted to do now was to fuse the 2 slave seals that had been condensed for the longest time and the most times into one. Since the slave seal could be refined repeatedly, it could naturally be fused as well. This kind of fusion was actually the same as the effect of repeated refinement. After 2 ordinary slave seals were fused together, the effect was equivalent to a strengthened slave seal that had been refined twice. The reason why Yixian had not used this method to obtain the strengthened slave seal before was because of the efficiency. Refining 2 ordinary slave seals separately, and then fusing them together again to form a strengthened slave seal that had been refined twice. By doing this, Yixian would have to refine the slave seal 3 times. On the other hand, if he directly refined an ordinary slave seal and then refined it again, the final result would also be a strengthened slave seal that had been refined twice. However, by doing this, Yixian would only need to refine the slave seal twice. With a 50% difference in efficiency, he naturally had to choose the latter. But now, for the sake of stability, Yixian had no choice but to use this method to fuse the slave seal. After some analysis, Yixian now knew why using the slave seal to subdue the wretched mosquito slayer ended in failure. In the end, it was actually his own carelessness. The demon slaves on the 2nd floor of the demon dwellers' cave residence area were all at the core state. The core state was the first major realm of the starry sky level. Therefore, Yixian successfully subdued them with an ordinary slave seal that had only been refined once. The wretched satellite state was the 3rd major realm of the starry sky level. If Yixian's guess was correct, in order to successfully subdue this guy, he would need at least a slave seal that had been refined thrice. In order to make a clearer description and distinction, let's call it a level 3 slave seal. But in reality, what Yiqing used on him back then was only a level 2 slave seal that had been condensed twice. This was the key to his failure. By analogy, the black mosquito mother beast, whose cultivation had reached the 8th major realm, the black hole state, would need at least a level 8 slave seal to successfully subdue it. This time, the most crucial part of Yixian's entry into the 3rd floor was to subdue this beast. Otherwise, with his strength alone, it would be a joke if he wanted to clear 2 floors in just 8 days. Therefore, there was no room for carelessness. All the preparations had to be completed according to the strictest requirements. Now, among the 402 slave seals in his hands, there were 400 level 3 slave seals that had been refined thrice, and the remaining 2 were level 8 slave seals that had been refined 8 times. Although he already had level 8 slave seals, Yixian dared not let his guard down. What if the level 8 slave seals did not work? Wouldn't he be completely screwed? With this in mind, he gritted his teeth and decided to fuse them. The reason why he was so reluctant was because the more he fused 2 slave seals, the more the loss outweighed the gain. After fusing 2 level 1 slave seals, there was almost no loss, and he obtained a level 2 slave seal. However, after fusing 2 level 2 slave seals, the loss began to appear, and he only obtained a level 3 slave seal. After fusing 2 level 3 slave seals, he only obtained a level 4 slave seal. By analogy, if Yixian fused the 2 level 8 slave seals in his hands, he would only obtain a level 9 slave seal in the end. Of course, he could also directly refine the 2 level 8 slave seals separately instead of fusing them together. This way, he would obtain 2 level 9 slave seals in the end. Unfortunately, there was not enough time. The further he progressed, the longer the time needed to refine the slave seals. It would take an entire day to refine a level 8 slave seal and upgrade it to level 9. And it would only take 2 hours to refine 2 level 8 slave seals to level 9. Yi Xian could delay his trip to the demon's nest by 1 or 2 days, but this would definitely arouse the suspicion of the wretched mosquito butcher. Even though he now had many level 3 slave seals in his hands and could truly subdue the wretched mosquito butcher at any time, Yi Xian considered that the wretched mosquito butcher's temperament would most likely change because of this real subduing. When that time came, it was inevitable that the black mosquito female beast would notice something unusual. Therefore, Yi Xian did not dare to do so. Chapter 2674. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Entering the mosquito nest 2 hours later, Yi Xian successfully fused the 2 rank 8 slave seals into a rank 9 slave seal. Yi Xian did not touch the remaining 400 rank 3 slave seals. Even if he could not control the Black Mosquito Queen's rank 9 slave seal, he would not be able to upgrade it to a rank 10 slave seal in a short amount of time. Only those of the same level could fuse with each other. In order to fuse a level 10 slave seal, one would need 2 level 9 slave seals. Of course, Yi Xian could also use these 400 level 3 slave seals to fuse with them. 2 rank 3 slave seals would fuse into a rank 4 slave seal. 2 rank 4 slave seals would fuse into a rank 5 slave seal. In the end, he would only need to consume 64 rank 3 slave seals to obtain a rank 9 slave seal. But the time, even though fusing slave seals only took about 2 hours, due to the large number of attempts, it would take about 2 days to fuse 64 rank 3 slave seals into a rank 9 slave seal. Therefore, Yi Xian decided to give up in the end. 1 rank 9 slave seal should be enough to control the Black Hole Realm Black Mosquito Queen. The rank 9 slave seal only took a little more than an hour to fuse. However, the time Yi Xian promised to bathe the Mosquito Queen in the potion was half a day, so there were still 3 to 4 hours left. Yi Xian was bored, so he wanted to go outside and see if he could find a chance to subdue a few demon slaves on the 3rd floor. However, after some hesitation, he gave up on the idea. The demons on the 3rd floor were all elites with cultivations above the 7th level of the Star Core realm. In fact, nearly half of them were no longer at the Star Core realm. With Yi Xian's current strength, he really didn't have much confidence in being able to silently complete all of this. The most important thing now was to subdue the Black Mosquito Queen. He should not cause any more trouble. With that in mind, Yi Xian started fusing the slave seals again, but this time he did not use the rank 9 slave seal. Instead, he fused the 400 rank 3 slave seals into a rank 4 slave seal. It would take more than 2 hours to fuse 2 grade 8 crystals into a grade 9 crystal, but it would take a lot less time to fuse 2 grade 3 crystals into a grade 4 crystal. After an entire afternoon, Yi Xian had fused half of it. 203 levels had been turned into 100 level 4. Right now, he only had 301 slave seals. 1 level 9 slave seal, 100 level 4 slave seals, and 200 level 3 slave seals. At this time, the wretched mosquito slayer had also finished soaking in the potion. He changed into a very flashy outfit and walked out of the side room. It seemed that the effect of the potion was quite good. In just half a day, the wretched mosquito slayer seemed to have changed into a different person. His whole body was exuding an invisible vitality, and he was in high spirits, as if he had just been injected with chicken blood. Hee. I wonder what Master is going to do in that demon nest? Seeing Yi Xian, the wretched mosquito slayer, who had been walking out of the side room with his chest puffed out, immediately lowered his back and walked over with a grin. If Master has something important to do in there, remember to wait for me to hold that mosquito queen back. Although I only soaked in the potion for half a day today, the effect is quite good. I am full of energy now. Not to mention a mosquito, even if it is an elephant, I am confident that I can defeat it. It sounded casual, but it was obviously probing. Yi Xian sneered in his heart. He also casually replied, facing a black hole realm mosquito demon, what kind of important matter could I possibly have to do? I have never seen this kind of demon beast before, so I just want to broaden my horizons. Then I'm relieved. If it's just to broaden your horizons, you can just stay in the periphery after you enter. When that female mosquito and I are working, you can just sneak a few glances outside the central nest. These words made Yi Xian feel a little awkward. As the two talked, They left the wretched mosquito slayer's villa and walked toward the small plaza outside the elite demon dwellings. When they arrived at the plaza, the wretched mosquito slayer activated the space door on the other side with familiar ease. As the black film of light appeared, the two stepped in at the same time, and their figures quickly disappeared from the small plaza. When they reappeared, the two were already in the small independent space of the Black Mosquito Queen's nest. As soon as they entered this space, a large cloud of extremely dense black fog rushed toward them. Yi Xian took a deep breath, and the mental power source core in his knowledge shook slightly. He instantly felt his mental power become more active. He had heard from Barker that the black fog that filled the entire space of the Black Mosquito Queen was created by this female mosquito, and that it was very beneficial for demon dwellers' mental power cultivation. Yi Xian had already discovered this when he was on the first floor of the Myriad Hells. Now that he had entered the female mosquito's nest, the dense black fog made him feel even more deeply. How is it, my lord? The black fog inside the bastion is the mating aura that the female mosquito emits when it flees. Although it is a little strange, it is very beneficial for demon dwellers' mental power cultivation. The wretched mosquito slayer turned to look at Yi Xian with a dirty look on his face. Do you know why I reached the satellite state in 3 years? When I came up, I was only at the star core state. In fact, it was because I was intimate with that coquettish mosquito. Breathing in its mating aura is so beneficial to our mental power. You can imagine how beneficial it is to have sex with that mosquito. He sounded as if he had gotten a great bargain. Yi Xian felt his hair stand on end when he heard this, and he quickly held his breath. He decided that he would never breathe in the coquettish mosquito's mating aura again, even if he was beaten to death, because it was used as a nest for the Black Mosquito Queen. This small independent space called the Demon Nest was different from other places. It looked like a natural cave, and Yi Xian and the wretched mosquito slayer were standing on the outskirts of this cave. There was a space door behind them, and there were several passageways in front of them. The entire female mosquito's nest extends in all directions, but any of the passageways in front of us can lead to the center of the nest. That is the true core of the female mosquito's nest. It's basically there. This creature is very lazy. Seeing that Yi Xian was looking at the passageways, the wretched mosquito slayer immediately introduced them. Then he changed the topic and said, I'm going to serve that female mosquito. My lord, you can wander around by yourself. When we are working and that coquettish mosquito lets down its guard, my lord, you can pick a passageway and walk to the end. Just take a look from afar. I'll come back here to find you later, and then we'll leave together. As he spoke, the wretched mosquito slayer grinned at Yi Xian, then turned and ran toward one of the passageways. Chapter 2675. Translator. Nayarbo Studio Editor. Nayarbo Studio. Great benefits. The wretched mosquito killer had indeed not been controlled by Yi Xian's slave seal. At that time, Yi Xian had not fully understood some of the properties of the slave seal. He had only used a level 2 slave seal on the mosquito killer, so he had failed. On this point, Yi Xian's deduction was correct. However, he believed that the reason why the wretched mosquito butcher pretended to be crazy and recognized him as his master was because of his slave seal. He was completely wrong. The wretched mosquito killer was indeed interested in the slave seal. Although the level 2 slave seal that Yi Xian had used on him had not been able to completely control the wretched mosquito killer, the level 2 slave seal still had some effect. Therefore, the wretched mosquito killer's dazed expression at the beginning had not been an act. However, when the level 2 slave seal's effect had completely worn off, it had not succeeded in controlling the wretched mosquito killer. By the time he had gradually regained consciousness, Yi Xian had already led the other demon slaves to plant slave seals on the other demon scouts who had accidentally encountered the operation and participated in it. They had also removed the brains of those demon corpses. At that time, the wretched mosquito killer had already had the ability to resist, although the level 2 slave seal had affected his mental state and prevented him from fully displaying his strength for a short period of time. However, he was still a satellite state expert. Even if he was not in his best state, it would not be a problem for him to deal with a group of Starcore state ants. However, he was extremely shocked by Yi Xian's slave seal and his act of removing the brains of the demon corpses. He could see that Yi Xian had a secret realm. The slave seal was not a big deal, But the act of removing the brains of the demon corpses was not only shocking, but it also made his heart pound with eagerness. He suddenly had a bold guess in his heart. If this guess was true, then the benefits he would obtain in the end were simply unimaginable. To put it simply, he would become the master of the entire Black Mosquito Bastion in one leap, replace Naibuishan's current position, and seize his power. Such a tempting and huge benefit made him, a satellite state expert, pretend to be crazy and kneel in front of a Starcore state ant. What was the big deal? Of course, he could have made a move at that time and used force to subdue Yi Xian and force him to reveal his secrets. However, in order to play it safe, the wretched mosquito slayer did not do so in the end. On one hand, he was worried that Yi Xian would throw in another mysterious energy that could penetrate his skin and enter his body. At that time, he would be in a daze for a while. If all the demons swarmed him at that time and tore him apart, that would be too tragic. On the other hand, due to his cautious nature and meticulous mind, he was able to control so many demons through Yi Xian without anyone noticing. He immediately deduced that Yi Xian would definitely enter the third floor. As long as Yi Xian went to the third level, he would have a way to trick him into the devil's nest. After entering the devil's nest, everything he had planned would be in the bag. For example, now that he had brought Yi Xian into the devil's nest, the wretched mosquito slayer did not plan to keep an eye on him and let him roam freely. In any case, Yi Xian could not activate the space door, so even if he roamed around, he would still be in the devil's nest's independent space. What he had to do now was to persuade the female mosquito. Once she was moved, he would immediately make a move on Yi Xian. From then on, everything he had planned would officially begin. Yi Xian was unaware of all this. However, he knew that the wretched mosquito slayer must have brought him to this devil's nest for a reason. However, all this did not matter. Didn't Yi Xian have his own plans too? Both sides had their own plans and advantages. The wretched mosquito slayer's advantage was that he was stronger than Yi Xian, and at the same time, he had an even stronger mosquito lover. Oh no, it should be his lover. On the other hand, Yi Xian's advantage was that he had already realized that the wretched mosquito slayer was plotting something. He also had the slave seal in his hands, which was enough to control the other party. As for the powerful female mosquito, Yi Xian also had his own plans. As soon as the wretched mosquito slayer left, he immediately urged the mind source core in his sea of consciousness and used a large amount of mind power to activate the perfect oscillation technique. Buzz! An extremely weak buzzing sound was heard. Then, a massive amount of mind power enveloped Yi Xian's entire body. With his body as the center, everything within a 1-meter radius seemed to have been directly gouged out of this space. It was as if they no longer existed. Yi Xian could no longer sense any aura from his entire body. However, Yi Xian's mind source power was constantly being consumed to maintain the efficient operation of the perfect oscillation technique. Although this consumption was not too frightening, it was not easy either. With the total amount of mind source power stored in the mind source core in Yi Xian's sea of consciousness, it could only last for about a day at most. It was obviously enough to hide his body and launch a sneak attack on the female mosquito. After doing all this, Yi Xian prepared the level 9 slave seal. He immediately chose a passage and silently groped his way in. The entire devil's nest was like a cave of coiling silk. It was full of passages in all directions. In the center of these intertwined passages was a large hall about 100 meters in diameter. Although it was called a large hall, it actually looked like a natural cave. There were no daily human amenities in the devil's nest, such as tables and stools. There was only a mosquito nest that was piled up by a large amount of black withered grass. Of course, this so-called bird's nest was extraordinarily large. It occupied the entire area of the large hall, which was about 100 meters in diameter. To put it in perspective, the entire central devil's nest was actually a large bed that looked like a bird's nest. If one jumped down from any of the passages on the walls of the cave, they would fall directly into the bird's nest, which was equivalent to getting on the bed. Right now there was a monster lying on the bed. It was a mosquito that was about the same size as a human. For a mosquito to be able to grow to the size of a human was indeed extremely frightening. However, although this mosquito's torso was still that of a mosquito, its head and limbs were no different from a human's. Judging from its head, this strange mosquito was indeed female. That was because its head was clearly a woman's face. Furthermore, it was an extremely bewitching and charming woman's face. Yi Xian, who had just walked to the end of a passage, saw everything clearly. The strange thing was that he had already arrived, but the wretched mosquito butcher was still nowhere to be seen. There was only the female mosquito in the mosquito nest below. There was no one else. Chapter 2676. Get out here in his line of sight. The bruised and wretched mosquito slayer was wiping his tears as he jumped towards the mosquito nest bed below. He was still crying and complaining when the words darling and the self-proclaimed Luan family entered Yi Xian's ears. It caused him to feel as if he'd been struck by lightning. His eyes widened in shock, and his mind was shaken to the point where he almost interrupted the perfect vibration of his mental skill. Soon that guy landed in the big bed of the mosquito nest below. Then, he used his hands and feet to crawl toward the female mosquito that was lying there and giggling. He then laid down beside the female mosquito and hugged it in his arms. As he cried and complained, he used his other hand to caress the female mosquito's inhuman body. It was an expression of extreme thirst. He was still crying and complaining, but he already couldn't wait. Such a strange scene caused Yi Xian to feel awkward, but at the same time it caused him to suddenly sigh with emotion. Amazing! No wonder he arrived later than Yi Xian. In order to gain sympathy, this guy punched him in the face in an unknown passage. Otherwise, how could he explain the bruises on his face? He just didn't know what this guy was planning to do and how he planned to do it. Why did he have to treat him like this, and put on such a show in front of a female mosquito? Just as Yi Xian was sighing, the two guys below seemed to have reached the point of passion, and started to do something that would make one's face turn red. However, because the other one was a female mosquito, this kind of action that would make one's face turn red instantly turned into a bone-chilling cold. If he hadn't been waiting for this kind of opportunity, Yi Xian would have turned around and left. Frowning slightly, Yi Xian resisted the discomfort in his heart. He gritted his teeth and didn't turn around, but he didn't immediately make a move either. The two of them had just started. The female mosquito was still on top, but Yi Xian heard from the wretched mosquito slayer that when the female mosquito was excited, it would flip over and press the wretched mosquito slayer underneath. Generally speaking, women would become wilder when they were on top, and presumably the female mosquito was the same. Since it was wilder, it meant that its mental attention was extremely focused on something, and its sensitivity to other things would be lower. When that happened, it would be the best time for Yi Xian to make a move. After all, his opponent was a powerful female mosquito with a black hole cultivation base, so Yi Xian had to be as cautious as possible. Soon the time arrived. As the female mosquito flipped over and pressed down on the wretched mosquito butcher, who was crying out because of comfort or pain, it was unknown whether it was because of the wretched mosquito butcher. Then it started to scream and drive. Yi Xian finally took action. Yangming enveloped the rank 9 slave seal with his mental power and quietly let it land on the mosquito bed below, where it slowly approached the female mosquito that was riding the wretched mosquito. The speed was very slow and very gentle. It was as if a snowflake was silently falling to the ground. The exit at the end of the passageway that Yi Xian was currently at was about 20 meters away from the bed. Although it was only a short distance of 20 meters, it took 2 to 3 minutes for the mental power wrapped around the level 9 slave seal to descend. During this time, Yi Xian's heart had been in his throat. Although it had only been 2 to 3 minutes, it felt like 2 to 3 years had passed. When the mental power finally landed on the female mosquito's neck and merged with it, Yi Xian's heart, which had been hanging in the air all this time, finally calmed down by half. However, it was only half done. Although the level 9 slave seal had already entered the female mosquito's body, Yi Xian wasn't completely confident that it would be able to successfully control it. After all, he had already failed once with the wretched mosquito slayer. That mistake was enough for Yi Xian to learn a lesson and become even more cautious. Therefore, he didn't intend to reveal himself. He continued to urge the power of the origin source in his mind power source core to maintain the perfect oscillation. Although he wasn't afraid of the wretched mosquito slayer, if the female mosquito wasn't successfully controlled, then Yi Xian would at least have a chance to turn the situation around. He wouldn't be killed on the spot. Yi Xian had previously learned that in the demonic dweller's ancestral star zone, demonic beasts like the black mosquito mother mosquito slayer also had a monster core in their brains. just like the demonic dwellers. In fact, when the demonic dwellers were stationed in the 10 space fortresses in the third universe of the human race, the 10 guardian demonic beasts had all been captured by the demonic dwellers' commander-level existences. They had used a powerful secret spiritual technique to leave restrictions in their monster cores. That was why the demonic beasts had obeyed orders and willingly stayed in the space fortresses to become guardian beasts. Since there were monster cores, then Yixian's slave seal should be useful. In fact, this was indeed the case. At this moment, as the level 9 slave seal entered the body of the black mosquito magical beast, the female mosquito that was riding on the wretched mosquito butcher suddenly stopped moving. It was like a robot that had run out of batteries. It stopped moving and stood there in a daze. The wretched mosquito slayer, who had obviously entered a state of mind, obviously hadn't realized that something was wrong. The guy's eyes were blurred as he mumbled, "What's wrong, dear? Why aren't you moving? Do you want more?" Such coquettish words had been said by a wretched middle-aged man in a coquettish tone that made one shudder all over. Yixian felt his stomach churn as he gritted his teeth. This guy was indeed poisonous. Even if he was faking it, the fact that he was able to feign such a state showed that he wasn't an ordinary poison. He was highly toxic, and no one dared to approach him. However, when he realized that after acting coquettishly for a while, the female mosquito riding on him still didn't move, the wretched mosquito slayer finally realized that something was wrong. He immediately opened his eyes. What he saw was that the female mosquito's eyes were blurred, as if its consciousness had fallen into a dreamland. The person was still here, but its consciousness was no longer in sync. He had encountered such a situation before, so he understood it at a glance. F***ck. Are you crazy, kid? Even this old man